begin.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. And welcome to the May 27th, 2021 Academic Affairs and Educational Attainment Committee meeting. I am calling the meeting to order. This is a virtual meeting, so as a reminder to participants, please speak clearly. Also remember that only members of the committee can provide a second to a motion. Live stream of the public meeting is available to the public on youtube.com at the ABOR Live link. Today, we're going to begin the meeting with an update from Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction, Kathy Hoffman. Next, we will review a request from both Arizona State University and the University of Arizona to discuss and approve their enterprise-wise metric targets and forecast measures. The committee is also going to review and discuss the University of Arizona's institutional metrics. We will then have discussions with the universities about accountability measures around online learning and instruction, and we'll review the University of Arizona's request for approval of their general education program. Finally, we'll end with a new organizational unit and new program request from the University of Arizona, a credit exception request from Northern Arizona University, and a request from the board office to approve a list of qualifying examinations for high school teacher incentive bonuses. So not a long agenda at all today. But before we get to those important topics, there are a few people that I would like to recognize. Those include NAU Provost Diane Stearns and ASU Provost Mark Sturl and Vice Provost Fred Corey. On June 30th, Provost Stearns is stepping down as NAU Provost, and we want to thank her for all of her efforts and recognize her successes. She was appointed to the provost position and vice president for academic affairs in March of 2019, but she's been an NAU faculty member since 1993, when she started as an assistant chemistry professor, and has worked for and served NAU in a variety of capacities over 18 years. She played a significant role in the Southwest Health Equity Research Collaborative at NAU, which was recently awarded a $24.1 million grant from the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities. So Diane, I want to thank you for your service and your contributions to NAU, and we wish you well. Dr. Searle has served as a tremendous leader at ASU in numerous roles, including the West and Tempe campuses. Mark has been coming to board and committee meetings for almost 25 years, but his last day is June 30th, and I'm sure he will miss the meetings. As the provost and executive vice president, Mark has led a number of initiatives to advance the university in both raising the academic profile of the faculty and students while embracing the university's charter. The remarkable growth in both access and excellence is attributable to Mark's focus and guidance. Congratulations, Mark, and we wish you luck in the future. Fred Corey's last day is also June 30th at ASU. Fred has been attending board and academic affairs committee meetings for many years. He's been an advocate for and assisted countless students, faculty, and staff in advancing the goals of undergraduate education. ASU's retention and graduation achievements were certainly part of Fred's dedication to his goal and his attention to all the details. He has an uncanny knack for listening to individuals and finding ways to solve problems. The board has enjoyed working with Fred these many years, whether on complex academic policies or in hosting the Regents Cup. And for these many attributes and others, we will miss Fred dearly and wish him the very best in the next part of his life. So to all three of you, thank you tremendously from the board for your efforts on behalf of higher education in the state of Arizona. Now we move on to the more standard business of the committee, and we are asked to approve the April 1, 2021 committee minutes. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, I move that the committee approve the minutes from the April 1, 2021 Academic Affairs and Educational Attainment Committee meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion does carry. The committee now will receive an update from Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction, Kathy Hoffman.
Thank you, Chairwoman Manson. I also want to start by acknowledging the Provost and Vice Provost for
their dedication to this work and for their phenomenal partners. So I also want to wish the best of endeavors, future endeavors to Provost Stearns, Provost Searle, and Vice Provost Corey. I will miss seeing all three of you in these meetings. And but good morning, everyone. Good morning, Regents, and to everyone on the call this morning. I want to also first take a moment to acknowledge respectfully the geographical landscape of Maricopa sits on the ancestral homelands of those Indigenous nations that have inhabited this land for centuries, including the Pima, Lehigh, and Living peoples. The first issue I wanted to raise today is one that has been brought to me by many of our school leaders and superintendents from across the state and has a direct impact on our students' success and attainment. Being a school leader is not an easy job, but so many of our educators are interested and do pursue educational leadership opportunities via master's degrees at their local state universities. However, in the last few years, the gap between their pay and the cost of these programs has widened significantly. While many highly qualified educators would like to pursue leadership pathways, the additional responsibilities and challenges of that job, the nominal increase in pay, and the rising cost of these programs make it so that these exceptional leaders have had less access to these pathways. Over the last year, our school leaders, particularly principals, have put in extraordinary work to keep their community safe and learning during the pandemic. I spoke to many principals during this time who have endured unimaginable loss in their communities and who have had to make very challenging decisions regarding public health and safety. Despite the challenges, they remain committed to their schools and communities, and they've demonstrated the impact of a strong school leader can have on the entirety of a community. I'm encouraging the board to consider additional ways to support highly qualified educators seeking educational leadership development. It would be ideal to offer tuition-free pathways for educational leadership programs, particularly for educators committed to staying in Arizona, like the Teachers Academy. ADE's policy and government relations team and our certification unit would gladly be partners on such an initiative. We've seen such success with the Teachers Academy, so I'd love to expand that further. Next, I'd like to provide updates on our federal COVID recovery and relief efforts. This past week, ADE has begun to distribute federal funds to public school districts and charters as part of the American Rescue Plan. So this is the third package of COVID recovery and relief funding, and the portion of the funding flowing to our K-12 schools is through the portion known as the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, otherwise known, fondly referred to as ESSER. So this is about ESSER 3. These funds flow directly from the federal government to Title I schools per their funding formula set by Congress, with Arizona Title I public schools expected to receive roughly $2.3 billion in new federal recovery funds. Unlike the prior two packages, ADE and public schools are required to use a portion of these funds to equitably increase student learning opportunities given the impact of the pandemic on student learning and mental health. All activities and interventions using these required reserved funds must be evidence-based, respond to students' academic, social, and emotional needs, and address the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on our most vulnerable student populations. Some examples of supported activities include summer learning or summer enrichment programs, extended day and extended school year programs, and comprehensive after-school programs. While we're supporting schools as they draw down on those funds, we also want to be an example as the department of how to use all of the available funding sources from ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and now ESSER 3 through how ADE is allocating our set-aside federal dollars for state initiatives. With strategic investments in our schools and education community, ADE is building structural support for schools and communities beyond the pandemic. This includes investments that support our students as they transition out of high school. And I want to say that ABOR and all three of our state universities have been fantastic partners in these initiatives. But just to provide a few other examples of how ADE is providing support for college attainment, we have invested $600,000 to partner with AdviseAZ AmeriCorps. So this is for college and career counseling. AdviseAZ places current college students and recent college graduates as part-time advisors in high schools throughout the state. They collaborate with school leadership to enhance the school's college and career culture. This new funding will be used to support AdviseAZ AmeriCorps placement in more high schools across Arizona. We're also thrilled to invest $1.5 million for the Ask Benji chatbot. This is to increase FAFSA completion rates. I'm sure you've heard about this before, that Ask Benji is an artificial intelligence-powered chatbot that is assisting students in completing the FAFSA. This funding will be used over the next 2 years to expand Ask Benji services statewide and enhance the chatbot to include new service features such as career interest and college application assistance, and provide support for community activities. Third, we are also proud that we have invested $20,000 in partnership with the Arizona College Access Network. This is to help train ADE staff to facilitate virtual and hybrid trainings for teachers to increase post-secondary attainment throughout Arizona with a focus on low-income and underserved populations. So these are only a tiny drop in the bucket of the funds that represent, so far, ADE has invested over $116 million in these types of statewide initiatives from our federal recovery and relief dollars. And as we move into allocating our portion of the American Rescue Plan, ADE will relaunch our Equitable and Effective School Task Force to gather stakeholder feedback on how to use those funds strategically to support students and teachers in the upcoming school years. So the task force will be helping we will be consulting the task force, and they will be guiding us in allocating an additional $180 million, which is coming out of ESSER 3. Next, I want to touch base on our preparations for the upcoming school year in terms of student enrollment and student engagement, because we have all heard that there have been concerns regarding the declines in student enrollment across the state. ADE recently launched a new task force, the Arizona Ready for School Task Force, to gather feedback and to help direct our work as we're re-engaging students in our public schools. The task force brings together representatives from tribal communities, education associations, community organizations, city and state agencies, our schools, and many more to help address the persisting challenges related to the pandemic in advance of the next school year. This Ready for School Task Force is part of a larger strategic plan that will also consist of proactive measures and efforts to empower parents and students with trusted information and critical resources to support enrollment and to re-engage our students and families and build trust. We ultimately want our families and students to have that trust in our public schools, and to also celebrate everything wonderful about our public schools as we're excited for our families to return for the upcoming school year. And then the last area I wanted to update on was on our other post-secondary efforts coordinated by our post-secondary coordinator, Andrea Glenn. And so some of these I've touched on before, but a couple highlights and quick updates of how we're also working to increase our FAFSA participation rates among graduating seniors. And I know this has been a concern raised to me by other regions as well. So we have continued to support the regular FAFSA drive-throughs. We've also continued with the statewide FAFSA messaging campaign, which has social media ads, billboards, PSAs, radio ads, and these efforts of the messaging campaign has helped to increase FAFSA completion by about 4%. Last time I mentioned that we were applying for a grant as part of the statewide FAFSA coalition with College Success Arizona. And so today, very happy to update that this coalition did receive the grant of $50,000 to support FAFSA completion for the class of 2020 and 2021. We have set up a virtual forum, and there's a website, azfafspa.org. It's using data from the State Commission Office, and they've identified 32 pilot schools across the state to strategically run our targeted campaign and outreach. And since opening this FAFSA assistance platform, we're averaging about 25 students per day who are signing up for support services. We're so thankful for all of these efforts and boots on the ground efforts from our post-secondary specialists and counselors. And so far, the percentage of high school seniors who have completed their FAFSA is at 39% as of May 7th. And the state goal is 52% by June 30th. And then just a couple more updates on this. The work in ADE around post-secondary attainment is, we're also very proud to be launching an inaugural post-secondary committee that will be made up of ADE staff and community stakeholders. This committee will meet on a quarterly basis and will have high school and college students contributing and discussing important issues around post-secondary preparation, planning, matriculation, and attainment. Thank you to ABOR's Larry Sondigo for accepting our invitation and being a part of this team. And this work will start in September of this year. I thank you so much for this time today. I know I covered a lot of topics, but I am very grateful for the partnership of ABOR and our state universities in all of this important work.
Thank you for your update, Superintendent. Are there any comments or questions?
Regent.
Chair Penley?
Thank you very much, Regent Manson. Superintendent Hoffman, I just want to thank you for a number of things. And you listed a number of them, but I think the most important issues are really the extraordinary effort that you've made during the period of the pandemic to really make our schools accessible and to keep students engaged. But for us, particularly on this board, your engagement with this board, your participation in our board meetings, and especially this committee, really points directly to something that both you and this board have focused on, and that is the overall post-secondary attainment and high school graduation rates in the state of Arizona. Your engagement with us reinforces the focus that we've had in that particular area. And I just want to thank you for that and laud you for that. It matters, I think, for Arizona. It matters to this board. The work that you're doing on FAFSA, Regent Duvall could speak to much more passionately than I, but all of us appreciate that. Your support for programs like the Arizona Promise Scholarship that may well be funded for the first time during this legislature has far more to do, I believe, with high school graduation rates than it even does with getting a four-year baccalaureate degree. But of course, one has to get a high school degree to move onward into that. Finally, I would just laud what you're doing on highly qualified teachers. We need teachers of math, science, in specialty areas. Your call for us to focus on those master's degrees that help teachers to become highly qualified in those specific areas, I appreciate very much. I call on our provosts, whom I see on this screen, to redouble your efforts to open those courses in accessible ways to teachers, especially during the summer and in the evenings when teachers have an opportunity, especially in the summer, to take advantage of that. I want to recall as well the efforts of Dr. Regier, who's with us today, and the offer that he and Arizona State University President Michael Crow have made to really offer online specialized courses where schools and school districts lack those highly qualified teachers. We have an enormous resource in what ASU can provide there. And in the absence of obtaining those highly qualified teachers, everything we can do to make those online courses available to students in the absence of highly qualified teachers matters for the success of our students and for the college going rate in Arizona. My sincere thank you.
Thank you, Regent Penley. I'm honored by your comments, and I agree so much with I think that this partnership and building the strength in the relationship between my department and the work I'm doing, and then the work of ABOR and our state universities, I think is really taking us in a positive direction.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. All righty. Thank you very much. This was a discussion item, and we are now going to move on to the discussion and recommendation for board approval of the Arizona State University enterprise-wide performance metric targets and forecast measures. So Chad will begin the discussion with a short level set of where we are in regard to ABOR metrics and accountability. And then after Chad's remarks, George Rodenbush is going to present ASU's proposed metric targets and strategic forecasts. So if the two of you will proceed.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair Manson. Appreciate all of your efforts in this. Want to begin, but I feel that like I also need to say just quickly to the two provosts and to the vice provost, thank you for all you've done, having worked with you over the years. Thanks for being my teacher in a lot of ways. And with that, we'll talk about your favorite subject, which is metrics. We're going to go ahead and start. Chairs Penley and Regent Manson, in speaking with Director Arnold, thought that it would be good at this point as we begin to approve metric targets and finalize metrics on a number of levels, that we do a level set for the board and for members of the universities and others to make sure we understand how this all fits together. And Tom, if I can get you to go to the second slide quickly. So members of the committee and the board have heard Director Arnold and I say this in the before, but I think it bears re-mentioning, which is oftentimes we categorize, or at least I categorize what the board does in 4 areas. It does issue management, that is, it takes care of legislative issues, legal issues, fiduciary issues. It has a constitutional responsibility to set forth the mission and vision of 3 institutions under its fiduciary control. And it provides an accountability role. And then 4th, it works on areas of statewide importance, such as attainment, which we've just talked about. The board, for over a decade, really back in 2005, began to develop metrics in its primordial state. But since 2010 has had metrics that it uses to guide what it does for setting the mission and vision for these institutions and provide accountability for the universities in which it provides. The board has a number of accountability tools, including routine reporting, its audit committee, its operational and financial reviews, and we're going to be standing up an enterprise risk management area of it. But the board was early adopters of the metrics and specifically putting out projected targets and forecasts into the future. We were the first in this sphere. There have been universities and university systems that have followed us. But over the 10 years, we've begun to mature this process. And Tom, if I can get you to go to the next slide. And in taking this next step forward in our maturation, we've essentially divvied up the metrics into a couple of areas. Specifically, we have enterprise, or what we call the enterprise-wide metrics, but enterprise metrics. These are a group of metrics that apply to all of our institutions. All of our institutions are required to provide targets for 3 years out on all of these. And then we stack on top of that institutional metrics. And those metrics are specific to the individual institutions. Then we have added a new area of online metrics because it has become an area that the board is required to focus on, and we'll get into that. And then finally, we have for years had peers, and we've revamped that peer process, working with the universities to come up with a better framework, which we now call comparator institutions. We no longer use the peer paradigm, but we use a comparator paradigm. In order for the committee to understand where we are, today we are going to hear about the enterprise metric targets for ASU and U of A, and the committee approve those metric targets in the future. We're also going to be asked to approve the enterprise metric forecasts, which accompany those metric targets. have a discussion with just the Arizona's institutional metrics, followed by a review and initial discussion of the online metrics. With that, Tom, if I can get you to go to the next slide. When we set the metrics last June and approved them, we approved along with it a board's promise to the University of Arizona. And the metrics are put into a framework that is ensuring accountability to make sure that the enterprise and the institutions within the enterprise are moving towards fulfilling this promise. Next slide. Quickly, we felt it was important to separate out, in case there are questions, what are enterprise metrics? Well, enterprise metrics, there are 15 of them that the board has adopted. They apply to all Arizona public universities, and they are intended to drive outcomes for the University of Arizona. These are the traditional metrics that the board has seen for a long time, along with some new metrics, but focused on enrollment of Arizona residents, persistence of our students, completions of our students, and the outcome of those completions with the wages they earn within Arizona and the worth of their degrees. Next slide. Accompanying with that is we have 11 forecast measures. These are measures of which the universities will not be held to account, but they do apply to all of the universities, and they are meant to inform the board about the university's future scale and direction. For example, we asked them to project out for 5 years their on-campus enrollment for both undergraduate and graduate programs. So the universities have an understanding of where the administration intends to take the university by the number. These are generally focused on enrollment, degrees awarded, and community college transfers. Next slide. We then move to a second paradigm, if you will, or a second box, which is institutional metrics. There is no set number of institutional metrics. These are individually negotiated and developed metrics with the institutions themselves. They are to sit on top of, if you will, the enterprise-wide metrics. There are and under the direction of Regent Manson and others, there are to be as many metrics as needed, but no more. They are supposed to be a limited number to help drive the institution forward. And it really is a focus on the institution's distinct mission as laid out by the regents and in consultation with the university's administration. So I threw on here ASU's charter because it's literally written in granite on ASU's campus. They adhere to these charters. So as you look at institutional metrics, there is a discussion around how are we ensuring that the university is driving to that distinct mission as laid out in their charter. And there's continuing ongoing discussions with each of the universities to make sure those are aligned. The university's strategic plans, if you will, the regent's visions for that university, the distinct mission and distinct culture and history of that institution, followed by the metrics to ensure that there's accountability around that. Next slide, if you would, please. Finally, this is a new layer that was requested by the regents to be added on, and indeed the regents have voted on that, asking for there to be a new subject of metrics, that's specifically around the online programs. The purpose is to focus on the quality of the online student experience and ensure the university's online brands and reputation remain strong and robust. And as you look at the online metrics, the idea behind it is the board finds itself now governing institutions that are educating all total around 80,000 online students headcount. As Chair Penley mentioned, that is more students than some states have in their entire university system. So as the universities, or as the regents work with the universities to learn how to best govern and provide oversight in this area, we are beginning that discussion. We have begun that discussion, and we are continuing that discussion today around the online metrics. Finally, if we move to the next slide, around this is the regents had asked us more than a year ago to begin working with the universities to revamp the peers framework in which we have lived for many years. There's a number of reasons for that. It is the peers as they currently constitute are not very good comparator institutions in some ways. They require the provost and others when they present against the peers to explain the various caveats, highlight the differences between our universities and our system and our enterprise and those at other states. And so Helen Baxendale worked with the strategic planners at the various universities to come up with a comparator institution framework. And it's supposed to do really 4 things. It's supposed to contextualize performance of ABOR universities through comparisons to other institutions operating under similar conditions. Regent Myers used to say, we are running fast, and we've run faster than we ever have before, but does that mean that we're keeping up with the rest of the field and how fast they're running? And he has instilled in the board that desire to always understand and contextualize where our universities are in the general pantheon of higher education. Again, it moves away from a single static universal list of metrics, and it's better accounts for the different contextual factors that our universities live under and work under as compared to other universities and other systems. And it's intended to adopt a simple and transparent approach that is integrated in routine reporting. We have 2 frameworks that we've set up. One is for the research apparatus. The other is for the educational apparatus. And you can see the criteria that are laid out there for the research apparatus. So you can see I'm just going to take ASU because it is first. The control is they need to be public, R1, very high research universities with no medical schools. That is their framework. And you can see the framework for NAU and U of A. And then at the end of this is going to be a result of, if Tom can move to the next slide, you can see, and I hope individuals can see this, this is what it looks like for the University of for Arizona State University. You can see their actuals, their targets moving forward, where they are against their targets, and where they are in this list of comparator institutions. The framework is supposed to have 5 below and 5 above, so you can see exactly what institutions they sit in the middle of. In this case, ASU's only got 4 above because they're sitting 5th among all institutions in the country around this framework. These comparator institutions will be integrated into the routine reporting coming up in the next reporting cycle for fiscal year 21-22. And with that was my short presentation and level set on the enterprise-wide metrics, the institutional metrics, the online metrics, and the comparator institutions. We're happy to sit for questions and talk about the accountability framework with Regents at this time.
So do I have any questions, or shall we just move on to looking at ASU's proposed metric targets and forecasts? Oh, Chair Penley.
Thank you very much, Regent Manson. Just a couple of quick comments. First, Chad, thank you very much to you and your team for what you've been doing on this. It's a major effort. It's consumed a lot of time. All of us on the board appreciate that. I also appreciate the fact that we are in these institutional metrics really realizing the vision that this board had in 2002, almost 2 decades ago, with its document Changing Directions, where it really focused on differentiating the 3 universities to better serve the state overall. These institutional metrics fit very nicely into what that board 2 decades ago, our board, wanted to do. So we fulfill in another step what this board intended back in 2002. Secondly, I applaud where you've headed in these online metrics. We have an enormous number of online students. You commented on what I said to you the other day about the number of online students in Arizona compared to the total number of students in perhaps some states across the country. We have an obligation as a board with the number of online students to focus on the kind of measurements that assure a quality education for those students, mostly working adults, mostly taking a course or two at a time, slowly moving through to get their college degree. Although there are some students, of course, who take a specialized course for their own interest, my guess is 90% of those are like those working adults I've just described at all three of our universities. So I just offer you and Regent Manson my sincerest appreciation for the work that you, Chad, George, Helen, staff members have done to get us to this point.
Thank you, Chair. All right, so we will, it has been a long road and we have worked incredibly hard. And I think some of us are buried, eyeball deep in this, and some of this will be the first time you see it. So we will work very hard to communicate where we've been and where we are. So with that, I think we are now moving on to George and the review of the ASU targets and forecasts.
Yes, good morning, Chair Manson and Regents. Before I begin, the exhibits that you'll see here today in this presentation are the exhibits directly in the report that you've already received. Our intention here was to organize all of the enterprise metrics and strategic forecast measures into conceptually grouped graphics, where we show some historical numbers for evaluative context, as well as the projections that have been provided for the universities going forward. In all cases, the columnar bars are actual observed values, and the overlaid line graphs represent the either enterprise metrics or strategic forecast measures that have been provided by the universities. If the bar graphs are colored in one of the university's primary colors, that is to indicate that it is an enterprise metric. A neutral gray bar is used where we're looking at a strategic forecast measure. With that, instead of introductory comments, I'll jump right in. The first metric here, set of metrics we're dealing with is on enrollment for ASU. The first metric is the Arizona Public High School graduate enrollment share. This is the percentage of all Arizona Public High School graduates who enroll in the institution. We can see that according to, based on the most recent data recorded, Arizona State was enrolling 9.7% of all Arizona Public High School graduates. They are picking that level up in their 2021 metric target, and then increasing it by 1 percentage point per year thereafter. Total resident adult undergraduate enrollment. In this case, we're setting the goal midway through 21, so we already know what the fall enrollment was. And so for 2021, the goal is set to the actuals, but going forward, they're proposing a considerable increase in the growth rate of the adult resident undergraduate population of approximately 5% per year, increasing a total of 10.8% by 2023, at which point adult resident undergraduates will be 10% of the total undergraduate population at ASU. Moving on to the next set of graphs, Tom. This deals with undergraduate enrollment more broadly. ASU proposes to extend its significant growth through 2025, increasing the number of the undergraduate student population by more than 27% by 2025. Growth is overwhelmingly anticipated through the online modality, which is expected to add more than 25,000 of the 28,000 plus total annual student enrollment. By 2025, online and on-campus modalities are expected to be almost equal in scale.
So George, can I interrupt one moment here? And I just want to say something contextually about, or conceptually about why we did these. So what we tried to do with the strategic forecasts was answer the logical questions of why the target is doing what it's doing. So while we're seeing in the targets, the targets, we're seeing the actual plan in a broader sense, the strategic forecasts give us a little bit of a longer time frame to look at, but also explain the component parts of that overall target change.
Yes, that's exactly right. I should have commented that the enterprise metrics are meant to shape behavior, and then they're more of an evaluative and goal-setting activity. Strategic forecast measures are simply intended to provide a sense of university aspirations over the next 5 years for broadly important national measures, measures that are nationally important. So moving on, Tom, I think for graduate enrollment, ASU again expects to extend its significant growth trend of the recent years through 2025. Growth is expected to exceed the undergraduate growth at about 8% per year, increasing the graduate student population by 36% by 2025. The growth is overwhelmingly expected through the online modality, which is projected to add approximately 8,400 students compared to an expected growth of 620 for on-campus programs. So approximately 13 new online students per every one on-campus student is expected. Moving on to first-time full-time campus retention, which will be the next set of graphs. ASU is setting an ambitious target for 2021 of 88% and then increasing by 0.5 percentage point each year thereafter. For first-time part-time on-campus retention, the series has been highly volatile due to a comparatively small number of full-time part-time students that are on campus at ASU. The initial year goal was set at about the midpoint over the last several years' actuals, and from there are expected to increase at 1 percentage point per year. Moving on to the next graph, which is the 6-year graduation rate. ASU has started their 2021 goal at 70%, an ambitious increase from current levels, and then are projecting a 1.5 percentage point increase each year thereafter. Moving on to the financial metrics. These all deal with undergraduate residents. The net price of tuition, after remaining relatively stable for years, is projected to increase at no more than 3% per year. Average debt per degree for resident students, after years of declines, is projected to increase by no more than 2% per year. And lastly, the percent of resident students graduating with no debt is projected for at a constant 48%, which is a decline from the last observed value. Moving on to the next set of graphs. This is resident bachelor's degrees awarded. ASU expects to extend the trend of the last few years, growing by about 7.1% annually, or by 862 students by 2023. Next page, please. Total bachelor's degrees is expected to extend the current trend of the last few years by growing bachelor's degree awarded by 18%, or almost 3,700 students per year by 2023. Growth is overwhelmingly expected through the online modality, which is expected to add 3,200 of those 3,700 total increased degrees awarded annually. Moving to the next set of graphs. Master's degrees awarded. The increases in the master's degrees awarded are expected to continue, growing by more than 4,100 or 51% in annual degrees awarded by 2025. The online modality is expected to account for most of this increase and is expected to grow by more than 95%, accounting for 3,900 of the expected increase in master's degrees, nearly 20 times, nearly 20 students new students graduating from the online modality than through the on-campus modality. Next set of graphs, doctoral degrees awarded. The acceleration in degree production is expected to continue with an expected 15% increase in the number of doctorates awarded by 2025. The nominal increase equally splits between the online and on-campus modalities, although this obviously implies a much faster rate of growth in percentage terms in the online modality. Next slide deals with the different types of doctoral degrees awarded. The expectation is for continued faster growth in research doctorates in comparison to professional doctorates. Research doctorates are expected to increase 17% over the next 5 years, while professional doctorates are expected to increase by 8%. Moving on. The enterprise metric that has been approved is the percentage of university graduates who are earning more than the Arizona median wage 10 years after receiving their bachelor's degrees. We are working with the Department of Economic Security to get those baseline median Arizona wages, which will allow us to sort of compute that metric and present it going forward. But in lieu of that, we wanted to present something around wages and outcome results immediately. So the universities have provided a sense of what they think their median wage will be for wage earners in Arizona 10 years after graduation for the next 30 years. And in the case of ASU, that's expected to increase from 64,621 to just over 71,000, which is a 10% increase from current levels. And lastly, research expenditures. ASU expects to continue the rapid advance of its knowledge enterprise. After just missing their $700 million target for 2020, they are maintaining their expectations for 21 through 23, consistent with the enterprise plan goals that they originally established back in 2016, which calls for increases of 20 to 25 million in expenditures annually. So that is a quick overview of the grouped enterprise metric targets and strategic forecasts. With that, I'll open for discussion, questions.
So do I have questions or comments from the board or the committee members? Regent Ridenour?
Thank you. Question, and please refresh my recollection. What is the definition of an online student? In other words, how many courses do you have to take to be considered an online student? Or if you're enrolled for one, does that count? And on your online students, I'm sure we'll get to the metrics later on retention and graduation and all that. But what is driving the online at ASU?
So I'll answer the first question by saying that in the context of the enterprise metrics and strategic forecast, an online student is a student that is enrolled in a degree program that is specifically partitioned as an online program. So there may be many students in the on-campus, traditional educational experience who elect to take online classes. Those would not be online students for this context. This context is they've applied directly into an online curriculum and an online degree program, which they will see through to their graduation. As far as what's behind the rapid growth at ASU's online enterprise, I would probably defer to ASU to best answer
that. Well, we work we have a goal to grow by about 20% annually, and a stretch goal to grow by 25% annually online. And with the reach of online to students, not only throughout all 50 states, but internationally, we just have more opportunities to provide access. And that seems to be a driver of opportunity for students to pursue their education, recognizing most of these students are transfer students. They're coming back to university because they haven't completed somewhere along the line, and they really would like to finish their education. And we're also seeing explosive growth at the master's level for online, because that's a career advancement step for a lot of students. And that's a very important part of the growth that we're seeing in online.
Thank you.
Are there further questions? If not, I have a couple of my own. I want to go back to the student retention rates and the graduation rates, and there are significant increases in both of those from current year to coming year. And in particular, retention, you're going up by just a little under 2%, which is an enormous leap in that realm. I'm just kind of curious as to what the rationale is behind that.
Well, Regent Manson, and first of all, I should thank you first for your kind comments. It was very thoughtful of you. And to all the board members, I've appreciated the work we've done over the many years, as well as with the board staff. With respect to the retention, the president has set out for us a very clear goal to be at 90% or better retention of our undergraduate students. And so we are deploying every tool and every asset we possibly can devise to drive toward that goal. And so, you know, that's our aspiration, is to hit that goal. And so only way to get there is to set pretty bold efforts. And we have seen as much as, I think the largest increase I experienced was about a 1 to 1.1% increase in retention in 1 year. And so I know that we can make strides. There'll be some difficulty recovering, I think, for a year from the pandemic, because there'll be a lot of students in a little different state. But I think that overall, I think we can work toward this, and I think that the university will achieve that as it goes. We're very close on the in-state. At in-state, we're, I think, I can't remember now, over 88%. So we're very excited about that, and they represent the largest share of our undergraduate student enrollment.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The only other one that I wanted to ask about was the financial enterprise metrics, and the combination of the increase in net price of tuition, the increase in average debt per degree for Arizona students, and the decrease in the percentage of resident students graduating with no debt. And I want to make sure that that is a combination that the board is aware of and comfortable with. It is, yeah, I think it probably deserves a little bit more of a discussion and reflection.
Chair Manson, I'll just comment from the discussions that we've had with the universities. I do think that these rates were suggested in the context of the net price of tuition and the average debt per degree for Arizona residents as sort of high watermarks, right? Not to be exceeded, rather than sort of, you know, that this is what they expect. They sort of just wanted to draw a line in the sand and say, we won't go past that, was how I understood these conceptually.
Okay.
So if I might add something, Richard Manson, I think George is right. These are not goals for us to achieve these numbers. These are goals. These are things we need to stay under. But all of these numbers are derivative largely of our ability to provide institutional financial aid to our students. To the extent that we can do that, we can keep our numbers as low as they have been. As we increase the number of resident students that are up, our expenditures on institutional financial aid are already extremely high, and a lot of that is going to students who have high levels of need. We're reluctant to project decreases over time in the net price of students because of how much of a strain the institutional financial aid goes on. The possibility, for example, of the Arizona Promise program that seems to have some traction in the legislature right now could help that substantially. But we put these numbers together just to indicate that we don't have the current capacity to just assume that we'll be able to continue to meet the needs, particularly some of the things that are being driven by the outcomes from the pandemic are showing students at the needy end of the scale as being even needier than they've been in the past. And so that may drive some of that will drive the whole dynamic of this.
Perfect. I just wanted to make sure that the board was clear on what this meant and why it was there. Regent Shootman?
I'd just like to add another comment. I think our three universities deserve a great amount of credit for being able to provide the level of student support that we've done. But you can only squeeze that turnip so hard, and without greater support from the state and legislative approval of increases in our overall base funding, there's no option but for those numbers to go up. We're doing all we can. I'd like to see us do more. But realistically, I don't think those numbers are far from what we see without a change in the basic funding support that we receive.
I think that's a very good point. And I think that this was the discussion that I wanted. These were the points that I wanted to have brought out to the public, in that, we are already providing an extraordinary amount of institutional aid, and that, as we look to increase Arizona attainment, that aid is likely to need to increase in some way, shape, or form, and revenue has to be generated to provide that. So are there any additional comments or questions? Then I am going to move that the committee forward to the full board for approval the Arizona State University Annual Enterprise-Wide Metric Targets and Forecast Measures. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion does carry. We are going to move on quickly, as we are a little bit behind time, to the discussion and potential recommendation for board approval of the University of Arizona Enterprise-Wide Performance Metrics and Forecast Measures. So George, can you run through those for us as well?
Sure. Again, the exact same order, the exact same format, so this should be a little bit faster. Arizona Public High School graduate enrollment share, the last recorded value for the University of Arizona was 5.2% of Arizona public graduates enrolling at the institution. Their projections going forward are that will decline to 4.9% and then 1/10% each year thereafter. Total resident adult undergraduate enrollment. Again, we have goals here that imply a growth rate of 3.4% annually, increasing 6.8% in total by 2023 to become approximately 8.8% of the total undergraduate population. Tom, next page, which is the undergraduate enrollment. Projection extends and accelerates the long-term trend through 2025, increasing undergraduate student population by more than 8%. In the next 5 years, the growth is overwhelmingly expected to come through the online modality, which is expected to add about 2,300 of the 2,900 total increase in annual student enrollment. The next set of graphs deals with graduate enrollment, where the University of Arizona is expecting a significant acceleration in graduate enrollment. Growth is expected to exceed undergraduate growth at about 5.25% per year, increasing the graduate student population by 26.6% by 2025. The growth is skewed towards the online modality, which is projected to add approximately 1,600 students compared to an expected growth of 1,200 students annually on campus. The next set of graphs, the first-time full-time on-campus retention is initially expected to be lower than current values, but to increase by a 1.5% percentage point per year thereafter. The part-time full-time on-campus retention rate is also initially expected to be lower than current values, but is expected to increase by 0.5 percentage point per year thereafter. Getting back to the neighborhood of current values. The next graph is the 6-year expected graduation rate forecasts, which are expected to be sort of a record year at 2021 at 64.9%, and then to increase by 0.5 percentage point per year thereafter. Moving on to the financial metrics, the net price of tuition after decreasing for the last 2 years is being projected to increase by no more than 3% per year. The average debt per degree for resident students after years of declines is projected to increase at no more than 3% per year. And then the percent of resident students growing or graduating with no debt is projected forward at a constant rate of 50%. Moving on, resident bachelor's degrees awarded is expected to increase by 3.7% or 186 students by 2023. Total bachelor's degrees are expected to extend the long-term trend in place by growing 6% or almost 450 students annually by 2023. The growth is overwhelmingly expected through the online modality, which is anticipated to add 480 of the 640 total nominal increase in degrees awarded by 2025. Moving on to master's degrees, after absorbing some anticipated declines in on-campus master's degrees awarded in the period from 21 through 23. Degrees are expected to increase remarkably, growing more than 700 degrees awarded, or 35% in total by 2025. In nominal terms, online is expected to grow faster than on campus, adding 440 master's degrees awarded versus 270 for on campus. In percentage terms, the contrasts are, of course, more striking, with an expected 60% overall increase in online master's degrees awarded versus a 19% increase for on-campus master's degrees awarded by 2025. Moving on to doctoral degrees, the acceleration in doctoral degree production is expected to continue with an 18% total increase by 2025. The nominal increase leans towards on-campus, with a projected growth adding more than twice as many on-campus doctoral degrees awarded than in the online modality. Doctoral degree types, after a few relatively stable years, projections indicate an increase in research doctorates back towards previous highs set in 2015 and 2016. By 2025, projections call for an 18% increase in the doctorates awarded from current levels. Professional doctorates are expected to initially remain near current levels before advancing rapidly to increase also by 18% by 2025. Finally, graduate wages. Again, this is in lieu of the percentage of the enterprise metrics, where we would be looking at the percentage of students making more than the median wage. So this is a forecast of what the median wage earned by bachelor's degree graduates 10 years out of school would be. The University of Arizona expects an increase from $60,792 to $64,418, which is a 6% increase by 2023. And lastly, research and development expenditures. U of A expects to continue the rapid increases over the last few years, growing by 25 million per year to reach 825 in annual research expenditures by 2023. So opening for questions and discussion. Yeah.
So questions, comments from board members, committee members? Superintendent Hoffman.
Thank you, Chair Manson. I was wondering about the very first one, the enrollment, the Arizona Public High School graduate enrollment share, and just curious why we're expecting a decline.
I think that is a U of A question. Can somebody from U of A address that?
Chairman Manson and Regent Hoffman, thank you for the question. The major driver behind that, it does not reflect a decline in Arizona enrollment whatsoever. We're planning to increase enrollment of Arizonans at all campuses and across all modalities. What that really reflects is just the size and scale of the growth in the Phoenix metropolitan area. And with our campus being 113 miles away, the cost of housing and other living expenses for that really sizable growth in Phoenix ultimately reduces our market share, even though we are growing.
Okay, so what you're saying is if we were looking at actual numbers of Arizona residents enrolled, it would still be increasing.
Chair Manson, yes.
Okay. And that would explain, that same logic would then explain ASU's increase in the percentage that they presented earlier. That would be a portion of that logic as well.
I would refer that to ASU.
Right. No, I mean, I'm just, if that's part of your logic, if you apply that logic to ASU's numbers, it creates that difference. Regent Penley?
Thanks very much, Regent Manson. A couple of things in these metrics concern me. One of them is the graduation rate, which still is projected to remain below 70%. When I go back and look at the U of A education peers that we discussed earlier, there's not a single one of them below 80%. And these are old data from 2018. So the U of A in no way is projecting the kind of aggression that will lead to catching up with any of its peers with data from 3 years ago. This concerns me because if we're going to have a highly distinctive institution that is competing with Wisconsin and Minnesota and other major research universities, then we need a graduation rate for students that really comes much closer to 80, 82, 85% over 6 years rather than less than 70. A second concern I have is research, and that is that in 2018, among the research peers for the University of Arizona, not a single school had less than $1 billion. Most had above $1.2 billion, except for Stanford. So again, when one looks at the research peers, we're seeing a continued lag by the University of Arizona in really representing itself as a major research university. So both of these issues concern me about where the university is headed. And I don't know whether President Robbins or one of the other individuals at the U of A wants to address that, Regent Manson, but my sense is aggressive goals will drive change. Kind of weak goals, like the ones that we're seeing here on research and graduation rate, will not drive the kind of change that will allow this institution to catch up with its peers. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm gonna add on a little bit to that, because I think my impressions of not only the graduation rate goal, which I didn't think was particularly ambitious, is that the retention rate and the retention rates aren't projected to be any higher than they currently are. And I mean, that is a tremendous opportunity for us at the U of A. And I do agree as well that the research goal appears to be relatively unambitious as well, at least relative to, you know, the other schools that we mentioned, what we looked at as peers, and particularly in the area where we have discussed what we feel like is a weakness in the medical arena in the research area for U of A. So I would like to have U of A address both of those items if they could.
Yeah, I'll start, Chair Manson and Regent Penley, by talking about the research, and maybe ask Provost folks to talk about graduation rates and retention. But I would agree with you. We want to be aggressive. We want to hit that magical $1 billion in research expenditures. I thought that there were only 13 universities in the country that had attained $1 billion in research expenditures, but I could be off on that, and maybe Dr. Cantwell could help me out. But clearly, we're planning to continue to grow research at what I think is an aggressive $25 million a year is what we're projecting. I think Regent Penley is correct. There's a lot of opportunity, certainly around the health sciences, that I think we could make a lot of headway. But I think we're moving toward strategic investment in research infrastructure and going for a strategy for some of the bigger awards. And as you well know, those are sometimes high risk, high reward type endeavors. But I think we'll continue to see a growth in research expenditures. So maybe I'll stop there and see if Dr. Cantwell wants to amplify anything I said. And then we'll go to the retention and graduation issues.
The only thing that I would amplify in terms of what Dr. Robbins said, and this is something we alluded to, I think, in some of our earlier discussions, is that we clearly have major growth in front of us in our research expenditures in the medical arena. We are really slightly under where we should be for the size of the university, of the faculty and the services that we provide. And the fact that and Regent Penley, the fact that we aren't setting an aggressive goal and or a more aggressive goal comes from two things that we need to recognize. One is we are being relatively aggressive given the some of the constitutive challenges that the medical campuses have at the University of Arizona. And we are not taking it easy on ourselves by any stretch of the imagination. We have people across both of our medical campuses and in my office who are working very, very hard to ensure that the ground of being for the faculty who want to do research is improving day by day. And then we have some business challenges as well. I believe that that's a different discussion and it's moving forward very rapidly, but we can't tell our own faculty to go someplace that is completely out of the realm of not reality, but when they are working as hard as they are, and when they are moving as fast as they can, and when they are putting proposals together as often as they can, especially given the amount of effort that the medical faculty put in during the COVID time, I would be very uncomfortable telling them they were not doing enough. And that's really sort of my bias. I've leaned that bias in towards the president. We clearly are going to be $1 billion a year research revenue university. And my best guess in terms of reality, that will come through medical college research growth, is in about the 2030 timeframe. And I think we discussed that in the past. We could certainly change our metrics, but I'm very mindful of how we signal to the people here who are working as hard as they can to do the research that they know how to do, that we are on a positive path for them.
Chair Penley, comments?
Yes, first of all, just to Dr. Cantwell and to President Robbins, thanks very much for offering that explanation. And I listened to you, Vice President Cantwell, talk at the research meeting chaired by Regent Duvall about where you were headed there. And so I take that into account. And I agree with you. You can only ask so much of a single faculty member. To me, however, a more aggressive set of metrics, and let's just focus on research for a second, really drives structural changes at the institution. So I recall some years ago, prior to your role and Dr. Robbins, where I questioned the provost about allocation of lines, faculty lines, because it didn't look to me like the allocation drove the research forward at the institution. So my sense is there have been some real changes there, and I appreciate that very much. When Dr. Robbins, you and I talked, as well as other board members, about the medical school in Phoenix, we recognize that without the science faculty in conjunction with the physician faculty, that we're not going to achieve the research focus that we need there. So again, is restructuring necessary of that medical school and the faculty who surround it to drive the research forward? So I guess what I'm looking for in asking my question about whether these metrics shouldn't be much more aggressive, ambitious, to use Regent Manson's word, than they are, really is about how strategic decisions are made at the institution, rather than, kind of pushing a single faculty member to put together more proposals. But in the face of the kind of discussion that's going on in Washington with the National Science Foundation, with its director's appearance before the legislature a few days ago, it seems to me that in monitoring that, we ought to be looking at far more ambitious goals. With regard to the other one that I was focused on, which is graduation rate, and as Regent Manson noted, that's highly linked to retention, then again, it's about restructuring somehow what's going on, both in the curriculum and in the support services, that really would lead to a higher retention and higher graduation rate. So I'm looking at metrics here that I believe ought to be ambitious enough to drive strategic change at the institution and to allow everyone at the university to feel the pressure on them to make those strategic changes in order to be much closer than the peers. And the schools I was looking at on research in the original peer are schools like University of California, San Diego, Wisconsin, schools like that. With regard to graduation rates, I'm looking at Rutgers on your list. I'm looking at Minnesota. I'm looking at the other typical schools here on my iPad. So anyway, I would just hope that you would reconsider where you are with this and really come up with something that's far more ambitious, that's worthy of what this university really is and what it should be living up to.
Do we have further comments or questions from the committee?
Regent Manson, I mean, we could have a long discussion here about this. I think if you look back over the last 4 years, what we've done, I think when I arrived, our research expenditures were in the 600s. I don't know, Barry, what the growth rate has been for the University of Arizona compared to others, but it's been substantial, nearly 800 million now. So I think what we're saying to you is there is a reallocation of resources and strategies that will help us continue that growth that we've experienced over the last 4 years. Moreover, I would say you hit right on it, Chairman Penley. We have to hire individuals and expand our faculty because, as you well know, how these research awards get done. None of us as administrators write any research grants. There are professors who do that. And we have to have graduate students that help to do the work. So all those things are taken into consideration. And I'm confident that we will continue to grow our research enterprise as we have over the last 3 or 4 years.
Regent Shootman?
I wonder if those other schools with the higher graduation rates aren't schools that only admit A students. That's been a factor for us for a long time with our state standard of admitting A and B students. That can be a significant factor in graduation rates. I'd have to go and look at that, but I suspect that that's the case in some of those institutions. And the problem with comparators is the problem with comparators, the amount of support they get from the state, the ability to hire the faculty and do all those things, not excuses, but the reality that we need to build on. And I understand where these numbers come from based on the rapid growth we've had in research and the need to continue to make changes to facilitate it. I like aggressive goals. I also like attainable goals. And so I felt through this whole presentation for all the schools that we've been looking some more at forecasts than goals sometimes. And I wonder whether there's a little bit more of what we think is going to happen rather than what we seek to have happen in some cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Shootman. John Dudas?
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in a little bit on what Regent Shootman was raising, because that is something we're going to really have to balance. We talked about being in the top 20 largest public universities and top 20 in terms of research. There's not a single other school in there that's a Hispanic serving institution. The others in there reject on average more than half of the students that come in. And so just looking up, Rutgers, rejects twice as many students as applicants as U of A. UC San Diego, more than 4 times as many students. So it's not that we can't balance these things and do excellent work. It's just we have to, I think it's important to support what was raised there, that in Arizona, we're about lifting up everyone, and we have an 85% admission rate, and we need to balance that as we consider students and their success. We're not only selecting A students. I just wanted to point to some of those stats. Thanks.
Thank you, John. I'm curious where the committee stands at the, I see Provost Volks.
I would just like to pipe up also and make a small remark about the impacts of the pandemic. We have been on a very steady trajectory to improve our retention and completion rates with time. That work is front of mind for me. We are doubling down on those efforts, and I agree very strongly with Regent Penley that many of those efforts require system level changes by the university, and Vice Provost Greg Heileman, who's here with me, is an extraordinarily strong partner in driving systemic change that will increase retention and completion rates. We are, however, struck by how challenging the pandemic has been for our students, and we do anticipate that we are going to need to rebuild some of our retention figures following the pandemic, and the projection we see in front of us reflects that unfortunate reality. When I say that we're doubling down on it, we're meeting on a daily basis to focus on all and every efforts that can be made right now to minimize the pain and harm to our students' educational aspirations that the pandemic has wrought. I hope that we will land in a better place than these projections suggest, but it is early days for this cycle.
So just out of curiosity though, so first time full-time retention rate, understandably, the class of 21 could be impacted by the pandemic. I understand that. But the idea that it would take 3 years to get back to the 2020 level of retention once we are, dare I say it, back to normal operations, is curious to me.
So Regent Manson, we don't have a good beat on it. It's my first pandemic. Let's
hope the last.
Hope for the last. I keep comforting myself that in 1918 they were dealing with a pandemic and a world war. We've only got one to deal with, so that's good, right? We are uncertain of the impacts for families going forward. We know there's been substantive fiscal impact to many of our families, and we just don't know how long it's going to take to rebuild the economy for those families that have been most affected. And of course, those families that were most affected were also the families for whom student success can be the most challenging. So we don't know. It is our first run through this process with a pandemic as the backdrop, and we're doing our best job of projecting it, and we will give you an update if we see any optimism to suggest that those families are going to be able to bounce back into economic security that in turn feeds student success. It's just a lot of uncertainty that we're grappling with.
Okay. Chair Penley, did I see your hand up?
Yes, just a final comment. Regent Manson, I apologize for taking too much time. I want to laud President Robbins and his team for what they've already done in a number of areas, particularly in research. There's been real substantial change, as you noted, President Robbins, since you became the president. And that's really quite laudable. And I don't wish to diminish that whatsoever, because I think it's really great. What I'm just wishing for are forecasts that were more ambitious forecasts than the ones that are here, ones that will position this institution to be the kind of great research university that I know it is, and I know it should be for the state of Arizona and for our country. And so I'm looking at my hopes for the university, and those are embedded in my comments. They're not intended to be criticism. They're intended to laud this institution for what it really is, and really to sing a song of praise for both what it has done and what I believe it can still do, which I believe is even more ambitious than these forecasts that George has presented. So please take it as a complimentary set of comments, not a negative set of comments. And I recognize as well what Regent Schutman said. But it is our responsibility, even with B students, even being an Hispanic serving institution, to really lead those students to success. And we take that on because of what we are and the kind of students that we admit. So again, it's a sense of hope that I argue for. And that's why I guess I would urge Regent Manson, our chair, to really have you look at this one more time before we approve it. That would be my recommendation, because I do think you are implementing strategies that matter for the change and matter for forecasts that will indeed be better and more ambitious. So congratulations to what you've already accomplished.
So I feel somewhat the same way in that I think I would like you guys to take one more look at this. Particularly, I think we're focused on the retention, graduation, and research areas, and bring us some potential additional thoughts before we go to the board. That's why we have these meetings, so that we can have these kinds of discussions and adjustments in the interim. I agree as well. There has been tremendous, in particular in the research arena, tremendous improvement. I think we all see U of A with still tremendous potential on the table, and we'd like to make sure that we are putting goals out there that signal our trust and faith in the institution's ability to do more. I agree that the pandemic, the impact on retention and graduation rates is real. That said, I would like to see if there's a way for us to improve that, because that retention rate not only impacts students themselves, it impacts University of Arizona's, and all of our institutions need to continually recruit. It is a much less expensive process to keep somebody in school and have them succeed than to have them drop out, replace them with a new freshman, and then have them come back at some point later in time and try to get their degree. So the better we can do on the retention, the better off not only the institutions, but the individuals themselves are. So with that, I think what I would like to do with the committee's agreement is move that we forward this to the board with any potential amendments that come to the committee before the board meeting in June. Do I have a motion to do that?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second. So,
Ready. All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Second? Any nays? Motion carries. So we look forward to one more discussion with you all on this, and we'll get there, I promise. All righty, I am going to keep moving, and we're going to stay with the University of Arizona at the moment, and we are going to move on to the discussion regarding their institutional metrics. And Barry, I think you have the floor for this.
Chair Manson, regents, presidents, leaders, I believe that we can probably catch up a little bit on time on this particular agenda item. We have a relatively small number of slides. This has been a discussion at depth within the university and with regents for the last year. I think we're getting close. We think we're getting close from the University of Arizona perspective. We do have a couple of minor changes to propose and to run through with regents today, so we'll get to it. Next slide. Just as framing, June last year, Regent Duvall's proposal to create and adopt the ABOR promise was passed by the board. That is a foundational component for our thinking at the University of Arizona. the University of Arizona's mission, our values, and our strategic plan, which you're very familiar with, are very, very strong influences in our institutional metric establishment process as well. Next slide. You'll notice that there is one revision here. We've gone from 4 proposed institutional metrics to 3. We're very mindful that the University of Arizona is one of 3 institutions in the board's portfolio. And I think we're very aware that you have a challenge of managing really 3 conglomerates. And so we have really focused on the components at the University of Arizona, which are fundamentally different than the mission and the structure for the other institutions in your portfolio. So the first goal, strategically recruit prospective high potential undergraduate students, we'll talk about on the next slide. There's one removal here and one addition. You'll see we removed the students winning prestigious graduate fellowships, and we replaced it with goal 1.5. We've discussed with Regent Rusk and other regents about the importance of having not just a metric to reflect incoming class diversity, but to reflect incoming diversity of success. I've shared before that is literally the second section of our internal large attainment report. We have added that here as a board level metric for visibility into that as a priority for the University of Arizona. That's 1.5 here. We removed 1.3 not because it's important, but we're very mindful of the dilution effect of having too many particular metrics in support of any goal. So in that sorting and filtering process, it's not that is important, it's that we ultimately recommend that this is just a slightly more important metric in support of this goal. Next slide. On goal 2, tackling critical problems at the edges of human endeavor, we have made one minor elimination here as well. We've reduced this from 4 particular research metrics down to 3. Again, this was we were challenged by one of the regents specifically to work to reduce the number of particular metrics in order to bring focus to the very most important ones. So the removal of the environmental research and impact goal, it's not that is not an important priority for the university. It's just that it is slightly lower in the large board's portfolio of metrics from the U of A than the 3 here. Next slide. One slight revision here. In the medical school ranking, we had originally had 2 for metric 3.1. We had originally had 2 U.S. News and World Report medical school rankings at the April AAEA committee meeting. It was a recommendation for us not to focus exclusively on U.S. News rankings and measurements, but to really identify the rankings across all the different publications worldwide that best reflect the areas of strategic investment at the University of Arizona. So the second of those U.S. News rankings, the one particular to research, we've replaced that with some of the rankings that we use internal with the university to measure reputation and the impact of our work in particular disciplines. It's the Blue Ridge Institute. And so we're recommending here for 4 particular Blue Ridge Institute rankings to replace that second of the U.S. News ranking. The School of Medicine and Physiology components, Those are foundational to all colleges of medicine. The anatomy and cell biology component is a ranking. That's where all of the University of Arizona Cancer Center's research and faculty productivity is captured. So while that name may not be synonymous in your mind with Cancer Center, that's really fundamentally what it's ranking. And the final component of the Blue Ridge rankings is related to family medicine. We're all probably acutely aware of the primary and specialist physician shortage in Arizona. So we added this one in as an opportunity to reflect our contribution towards that end for the state. There are a couple of other minor changes. One I'll point out later in the rankings, we added in the worldwide Shanghai water resource ranking. The University of we added that into 3.3. The University of Arizona ranks #2 in the world and #1 in the United States. We discussed that one briefly at the last Academic Affairs and Educational Attainment Committee meeting. So we captured that change here. And this is the final slide. There is not, we're not recommending a goal 4 as it pertains to public service in this particular package any longer. And Chair Manson, open it up to questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Barry. So do I have questions or comments from the committee members? Anthony, Regent Rusk.
Hey, Regent Manson. I just wanted to comment on the University of Arizona adding the diversity success metric. I'm extremely excited to see, even though I personally won't be on the board much longer, but I'm excited to see the success that the University of Arizona will have. I'm excited to see what the board does with this accountability metric, as this is a huge issue in the state of Arizona, as are different populations and our diversity changes in the state of Arizona. I'm excited to see how we can focus on these students, how we can propel them to success. And I'm hopeful that the rest of the enterprise will continue down this path of following that metric as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rusk. Regent Duvall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Barry, my question goes to metric 1.4 and 1.5. And what I'm interested in is having you address whether or not you see those as a continuum or possibly in conflict. And here's precisely what I'm thinking. 1.4 I get and love. 1.5, it seems to me, you could toggle your success on 1.5 if you toggle between, say, for example, Arizona Native American applicants from the Navajo tribe or other tribal nations versus foreign Asian students with, terrific persistence. And so I'm wondering whether or not 1.4 and 1.5 actually become somewhat competitive and are not in alignment, and sort of what your thoughts are about what you're trying to achieve.
Chair Manson and Regent Duvall, 1.4, 1.5, and frankly 1.3 are a complex challenge for higher education. We had originally proposed really 2 of 4 potential goals. One goal, and the 2 dimensions would be one to measure access as it relates to economic access, and Pell is a strong method to be able to measure that level of access, and then also race and ethnic diversity. And then the 2 potential metrics would be how strongly the University of Arizona's incoming class relates to the graduating high school class at Arizona high schools, and then ultimately that incoming either economic or race and ethnic diversity, how successful it ultimately is in graduating. We added goal 1.5 as sort of, now we have 3 of the 4 potential access and outcome related measures there. We don't necessarily see those as in conflict. The way that we have put together all of our data internal at the U of A, and I know that we haven't had an opportunity to run through all of that data, here in board committee, we're measuring the incoming diversity and on a race and ethnicity basis and on an economic basis for incoming resident students only. So it's really that high school measurement in Arizona and incoming Arizonans. So the non-resident and international students are not a component of the particular measurement change that we have developed internal. In all fairness, sort of scooping future board discussion, this is an area where the University of Arizona tends to do very well. An important part of our rise in the U.S. News and World Report national university rankings is that our students that come from a diverse economic or race and ethnic background tend to do very well relative to students that come from a more privileged background. So that's something that we tend to do quite well at the University of Arizona on both fronts, and it's something that certainly has been and will continue to be a priority for us. I'm not sure if I got to the whole heart of your question. If I missed any component, I'm happy to follow up.
Chair, if I could just do a brief follow-up. So I guess let me ask it this way. Why have you chosen not to use your universe of comparison in 1.5, the flow through of the Arizona applicants and demographic objective? Why wouldn't 1.5 be an extension of that same cohort as opposed to being influenced by other non-Arizona admission and other dynamics which are unrelated to the objective of the Arizona diversity factor reflected in 1.4?
So what you're saying is make the denominator the same in both.
Correct. Well put, Madam Chair. That's why you're the chair.
To be perfectly frank, we just hadn't considered that. We're certainly happy to measure through that method. That would aggregate together, in effect, the two different components jointly together, but we don't have any opposition to that at all.
Regent Rusk.
I'll actually push back on that quite a bit. As we continue to see the payer mix, and maybe that's a poor choice of words for universities shifting, particularly after the pandemic, the fact that we will be having more out-of-state students means that this is also a metric where we should be looking at diverse backgrounds of out-of-state students as well. I understand the concern with foreign exchange students, and I don't think, and as Barry already pointed out, they won't be included within that metric. And so understanding our out-of-state students, how that influences each other, this is a metric that looks at the community building of diverse backgrounds. So this is an indicator of what kind of communities we're building at our universities. And so our out-of-state students are a part of those communities. So 1.5 really helps us understand what are we doing to build the communities between our diverse students, as well as the success that they're gaining. And those two are kind of interlinked with one another. So the out-of-state students are equally as important in this metric as our in-state students, in my opinion.
So what we're stumbling, I think what we're talking through here is there a perverse incentive in having a different denominator between these two metrics? So would it in some way, and it doesn't say here, as I understand it, that international students would be excluded, that this is a full diverse student denominator. Thereby, U of A could, what we're trying to do is not create metrics that can be gamed. And so if U of A were to try and get to the point where they were meeting this diverse student success ratio or closing that gap, the incentive would be to, as I think as Regent Duvall said, recruit high-performing international students, high-performing out-of-state diverse students, and that could potentially leave Arizona diverse students, at a disadvantage.
That's already incentivized though. like if we're going to talk about, I think that's already incentivized within any sort of acceptance rate. Like we would be incentivized to decrease our acceptance rate full frontal with that argument. Like that is always a concern that we have as a board, is whether or not the acceptance rate is decreasing to increase retention and attainment. Like that was the argument that we already had in the last section. And so I don't think this creates perverse incentives, because we're strictly looking at how are our students performing from Hispanic backgrounds, Black backgrounds, how are these communities building? And so this is an issue for the entire nation, not just in Arizona. We're just tackling that issue here in Arizona by looking at, as our Latinx communities continue to grow in Arizona, how are we supporting them at an HSI like the University of Arizona? How are Black students being supported at the University of Arizona? And those sort of metrics could not be captured in, for example, the Pell Grant, which does have interlinking with students of color, but is not necessarily completely overlapping.
No, the Pell issue is intended to be diversity blind related to economic.
Right. And so this is covering the other side of that. So we have now the fiscal side of accessibility. Now we also have the cultural and community side of accessibility with 1.5.
Regent Duval, any follow-up?
No, I take that point. If 1.5 specifically is excluding international students, that would meet me where I am. These strike me as two very different things, and they have different objectives. And I take Regent Rusk's point that both of those objectives have value. But what I'd hoped we were getting at is the capture in 1.4 of a more diverse Arizona-based class, and the retention and success of that cohort in 1.5. That doesn't feel to me as what we're doing here, but I recognize Regent Rusk's point, it's doing something different. My preference would be that it would be a continuum, and to use your point, Madam Chair, that it would be the same denominator or some rough parallel therein.
I guess my question is, if we have programs that are established to create that parity in Arizona diverse students, those would apply to any other diverse students. I would expect to see the same type of movement if we were addressing the diverse Arizona students, and if we were measuring those as if we were measuring all. And if we want to make comparators between the direct comparators between the incoming Arizona diversity and the outgoing successful Arizona diversity, I think we can make the inference or see within another data, with another data point, in the reporting about the overall diverse. And I wouldn't expect to see a significant difference between the two, but I would like to track from A to B all straight through the process.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I guess what I'm suggesting then is that we make 1.5 the same denominator. So the essentially the profile of the accepted diverse Arizona students.
Chair Manson?
Yes.
Isn't it just
Regent Taylor Robeson?
Yeah, isn't it just adding a metric 1.5 or 1.6 where it's diverse resident student success?
Well, what I'm trying to do, and this is where we have been struggling, is what I don't want to have is 20 institutional metrics. And so there are so many different ways we can cut this pie. I'm trying to make sure that we don't have so many pieces that nothing is of value.
I do see your value in looking at the in-state students separately from out-of-state, particularly because a lot of our in-state students who do come from diverse backgrounds are necessarily coming from also relatively poor parts of Arizona, and that is infecting their ability to have some success. And so going back, I do think that there could be, as Regent Taylor Robeson just pointed out, the incentive to look at our in-state diverse students versus our out-of-state diverse students, since their backgrounds could be different. But I also think that's captured through 1.3. So I think either way we're still set, but if we're looking at the gap between 6-year graduation rate for diverse immersion students, that could easily be broken into in-state and out-of-state, and without having to be made into another metric.
I think it's a data point we could look at. If they were significantly different, it would be interesting to know.
Yeah, that's an easy breakdown. I don't think that necessarily mentions anything about the metric itself.
Okay, so Barry, I think we're then in agreement that we go to 1.5 on the Arizona
residents.
Understood.
Chair Manson and Regents, the diversity in every way from a recruitment perspective and from a student success perspective is foundational to everything we're doing at the University of Arizona. So all the different candidate disaggregations that we have discussed today, they're all important to us. We're certainly paying attention to all of them. I know the board's time is limited, and you're looking for the components from the U of A that are sort of the most important components for the overall enterprise. We can certainly add resident into that. That would be with the same denominator, that would be the easiest way to measure it, and certainly the most consistent.
Right. And then I would expect U of A to mention to us if there's a diverse population that is acting differently than most.
Chair Manson?
Yes.
I've had my real hand up and I'm looking for my electronic.
Yeah, and I only have like 6 people across my screen right now, so I apologize. Jump in. Yes, President Robbins.
So not to extend this any further, but why not just put 6-year graduation rate as part of 1.4, and then we don't contaminate the two groups?
We already have 6-point graduation rate, 6-year graduation rate as a enterprise metric.
All right. Okay. So I don't see where we got caught up here, other than the thought that we would be gaming 1.5. I still don't understand why we need to change what we presented.
Because it gives us a consistent look at a consistent cohort.
Okay.
And I don't think it takes away from anything. I think it is, yeah. And if we end up finding that there is a significant difference in performance and graduation rate, between Arizona diverse students and the total overall, other diverse students, then we'll have a different discussion, because that would mean that there's something distinctly different in those populations. All right, do we have any other? So the only question I had was, I have no idea what Blue Ridge is, but I assume you guys do, so we'll go from there.
It's a very good metric.
Okay. I had no other questions. Are there any other questions, comments from the committee? Then we are, this was a discussion item, and we will bring the UA institutional metrics back as quickly as we can to get them moving forward. We were scheduled now to take a 15-minute break. However, I'm already 10 minutes past the end of the 15-minute break. Do we want to take a 5-minute break, run to the bathroom and come back, or are we good to just keep moving? Okay, we're going to keep moving then. All righty, so the next is a discussion of the accountability measures around online learning and instruction. So this is a discussion item. This is the first, I think, shot that the committee has seen these. We have Helen Baxendale who will present, and then in addition to Helen, we have Jane Kuhn, the provosts, and who else is, somebody just took my screen away.
The online leads are also present.
Okay,
Regent Manson.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And so I will let Helen proceed.
Thank you and good morning, Chair Manson and Regents. I'll try to keep this very brief given we're already compressed a little for time. But before I detail the 6 draft metrics for discussion this morning, we at the board office thought it would be helpful to just very briefly outline why we've been asked to develop these metrics and what we're attempting to achieve with them. So Tom, if you could move to the next slide, please. So as we're all, I think, on this call acutely aware, online education has grown precipitously in recent years, both in absolute terms and also as a proportion of overall system enrollment. And online students now constitute nearly a third of total ABOR system enrollment, and we have every reason to expect that that proportion is going to continue to grow into the future. Indeed, George's presentations this morning all but confirm as much. And in addition, we've had the recent acquisition of Ashford by the University of Arizona, now known as UA Global Campus, which just further heightens the importance of devising some basic frameworks of oversight and accountability for online education. Next slide, please, Tom. So all of our institutions are already obliged by the federal government to report data on online students to IPEDS. For instance, online students are included in student success measures such as first-time, full-time retention and six-year graduation rates. So in this sense, online metrics are nothing new. What is new, however, is a serious effort to construct online metrics that take better account of the realities of the online student population and provide oversight across the full scope of the online population. So as many regions probably already understand, existing IPEDS measures are actually quite poor indicators of online program quality and student success because they only cover first-time students. And as we know, most online students are in fact transfers coming in with already credits in hand. And similarly, cohort-based measures such as six-year graduation rates are not really a good indicator of online success because there's no such thing as a common starting line for the majority of online students. And many online students don't progress towards their degrees in a kind of uniform and linear way. They often stop out for a time only to resume. They may not take the same number of credits semester to semester. So there's a clear need we see to devise better measures of online student success and program quality that take into account these realities. And a clear need also, I think, to fill the vacuum that's otherwise going to be occupied by the current flawed IPEDS constructs. Next slide, please, Tom. So the draft metrics for discussion today are premised on the assumption that all ABOR universities' online programs are committed, firstly, to graduating degree-seeking students and in turn to awarding degrees of educational and economic value. And it's important to note that the vast majority of online students at our institutions are enrolled in degree-seeking programs. So of ASU's 40,485 online undergraduate students, 99.5% of them are degree seekers. Similarly, at NAU and UA, both UA Online and UA Global Campus, we know that the vast majority of online undergraduates at both of these institutions are degree seekers. And so given this, we have devised metrics in close consultation with the university provosts and the online leads that are intended to capture the broad concepts of student persistence, degree completion, and instructional quality. Next slide, please, Tom. So these metrics are initially intended to apply to the undergraduate online population, but extension to graduate populations is certainly possible in time. And before detailing each of these metrics in turn and opening for discussion, the ABOR office would just like to thank all of the university personnel who've been involved in their development. And while we are certainly culpable for any remaining shortcomings, there's no doubt that these metrics have benefited enormously from the expertise of the provosts and from other senior administrators, especially the online leads at ASU, NAU, and U of A. And Regent Manson, I'm going to propose that we take each metric in turn because I suspect some of these are going to garner a lot more interest in debate than others. So if you're happy with that way of proceeding, I'll get to it and begin with metric 1. So we've grouped these under two kind of broad topics, the first being quality of the online student experience and the other being university and brand and reputation. The first metric we have proposed is online course completion rate. The definition is that the ratio of total online course credits completed for A to C grade or a pass in a pass-fail course to the total online course credits attempted across an academic year. We believe this is necessary to ascertain whether students are completing courses in good standing, and we think this is a reasonable proxy for student persistence over the short term. So open to discussion or any comments or questions about that one.
Seeing none, I think we move on.
Okay, excellent. Number two, I believe, is a little more contentious. This is online student attrition rate. And this is the number and percentage of students that have stopped out for 18 or more months. I've highlighted that timing there because I understand there is a certain amount of discussion about whether 18 or more months is a reasonable period. Again, what we're trying to get at here is persistence over the long term. And I understand Provost Searle and others may have comments about whether 18 months is the ideal timeframe here. So I invite him to come forward on that, and anyone else who would like to contribute to that.
Oh, thanks, Helen. If I may talk, I think that certainly 18 is better than the 12-month kind of measure we were talking about before. 18, I'm not quite sure what 18 or more months actually means, because when we looked at it and then the data we shared with you, we saw that in 12 to 24 months that we saw students come back, substantial numbers, and then in 25 to 36 months, and then even beyond 36 months, we found 12% came back. And so I think that knowing that we're, as you've said, that we're dealing with a very different student population, I think might be useful to think about retention in three buckets rather than thinking about it as only one bucket. In other words, are they in this or are they not? What if we looked at 12 to 24 and 25 to 36 and greater than 36 months out, and then saw, and that would help the board understand more deeply the texture of what's going on. Because we have the US News and World Report ranking for online, it already includes the very traditional metric for retention. So I don't think we need to highlight that again. And so I just think it would be much more helpful if we had a much more nuanced understanding of what was going on with the student body. And maybe I could ask Phil Regier if he wanted to elaborate a little bit more on that, since he deals with this through our Ed Plus program, a unit which manages all our online. Phil?
Thank you very much, Mark. Really, the only thing I'd add is, and I think Mark made it clear, is that online students differ substantially. Many of them will leave for a year or longer and then return. Our average student, undergraduate student, is 29 years old and is, to give you some idea, is transferring in generally credits from 3 other institutions. That's on average. And so these are students who start and stop and start and stop. And to give you a more nuanced understanding of the student pattern, I would suggest and recommend that we have several different stages here rather than simply one stage, less than 18 months and more than 18 months.
Thank you. So I'm not averse to having a couple of different buckets in this arena. I don't think the board has a good sense, and until we see some consistent data over a period in time, I think it will be hard for us to make judgments on these numbers. It would be interesting to see what kind of impact the schools can have over a period in time on shortening that, or moving students from one bucket to a shorter bucket. I just don't know, what kind of impact the schools have. If you're telling us that the students are such that they are driven only by their personal circumstances and not by a desire to finish with one institution or by a desire to finish in any particular period in time, that puts us in a little bit of a difficult situation in terms of placing value. But the ultimate value is getting our online students, a degree. And so somehow we have to be able to measure something in that arena that makes sense.
Regent Manson, one piece of context that may be useful here is that, as I understand it, ABOR policy currently has 18 months as the cutoff period beyond which you have to apply to re-enroll. At least that has been what has traditionally pertained for on-campus students. And I understand there may be very compelling reasons for that to be different for online students, but I believe that's where this 18-month kind of default has come from. But I absolutely sort of take on board what Provost Searle and Dr. Regier have had to say, and perhaps having these multiple buckets would be more useful and informative.
Well, and I'm wondering if it gives us a sense of institutional impact and success if they can move students from a 18 to 24 to a 0 to 18 bucket. I don't know. I don't know if that gives us value data, or if the institutions have the impact individually to be able to make that.
If I may, Regent Manson, you raise a very important question. We've tried to address that a little bit in looking at the data for the next metric, which was pace of progression to online degree, because they're somewhat linked in what you're suggesting. Obviously, we're trying to hasten the student toward graduation. When we looked at the undergraduate pattern at ASU from 2012 to 2020, the average SCH completed varies between 15.36 credit hours to 15.75 on an annual basis. So they don't seem to be changing their pace at which they're moving, even though we are obviously graduating more students, but that's because we're also enrolling many more students. So I don't think we've ever looked at, and I'd have to defer to Phil as to whether there are ways to help students accelerate that short of just increasing financial aid, which is something that creates other problems for us too.
Yeah, the one thing I would add, Provost Searle, relative to that pace of progression toward the online degree, is that we have made significant efforts over the past 10 years, and we've done many things to improve the overall student experience, including during that time period, the addition of success coaches, which are designed entirely and focused entirely on helping these particular reentry students with their particular life circumstances so that they succeed this time. Having said that, I think the students are much more satisfied with the overall experience, but it doesn't change the number of courses that they can take given the conditions of their life. And I think that's what the PACE chart shows, that they take about the same number of courses. But what we're trying to do is to get them to stop out less. And if they do stop out, we're focusing very intently on staying in touch with them for a period of up to 48 months after they've left to make sure that they'll return if possible.
Do we see, and again, these are all tied, do we see a higher completion rate in those who come back more quickly?
I'm not sure I know the answer. I don't know whether Phil does.
I don't have the answer, Regent Manson. We can find out.
Regent Manson, if I can add something, what we see is that students who actually take the PACE, more credits per semester, what have you, those are the students who tend to be those, of course, they would complete sooner, but those are the ones who have more skin in the game. I think that the approach that's proposed of having these 3 buckets is probably a great place to start. And over time, we could tighten the buckets. But I think it's a start in terms of having some sort of measure with respect to the attrition rate. So maybe a few years from now, we can start to tighten it up a bit. But I think it's not a bad way to get started.
Okay.
Yes. And Regent Manson, this is Gayla Stoner from NAU. I would also add my support for the 3 individual buckets, but I would also I think that it's important for us to reflect upon, going back to the dimension, the quality of the online student experience is actually heightened because they have the ability to stop out in this way, meaning that when students stop out and they return to the program in same university, it is because they've had a positive quality experience, right? So I think that correlated with the different buckets might help us figure out, how to move forward on how we want to track it in the future.
Okay. All right, thank you. Are there other comments, questions from the committee or other board members? Remembering that I can't see everybody's hands. Okay, so I think we have a consensus on that for now, Helen. It would be interesting to see some historical data.
Thanks, Regent Manson. We've already touched on this one a little bit, but metric 3 is pace of progression to online degrees. So this is the average credits completed per student in an academic year. And we think this is some important consumer-facing information because it helps prospective students and other stakeholders to see what their sort of average length of time taken to earn a degree will be, irrespective of what your starting point is. And we understand that this metric is unlikely to be particularly volatile. We also don't necessarily have any normative preference for it to go up or down. We just think it's a very important piece of data that should be sort of widely available and observable. So I'd invite comments and questions on that one.
I might like to just elaborate on something Helen said. I want to be careful that it's not perceived as progress toward the degree in some standardized way, because you have so many students who bring in different amounts of transfer credit. So the student who brings in 64 credit hours of transfer, or for some degrees, maybe 75 credits of transfer. If they're doing 15 credit hours a year, they're going to obviously graduate much sooner than the one who transferred in 30 credit hours. So we have to have a context for understanding what that means.
So explain to me what this, in its current structure, to Mark's point, if we have such a variation in incoming credits, what useful data does this give us?
Well, Regent Manson, this is our way of getting around the problem of constructing cohorts in online education. Because, as Provost Still points out, people are coming in at very different points of progress, coming in with very different amounts of credits already in hand. What this is telling you is how much distance can people hope to, accomplish in an academic year, even if they may be starting at different points along their journey towards a degree. So if I come in with 64 credits already in hand, if I know that on average, students at ASU Online are able to complete, say, 15 credits per academic year, I can then calculate forward, well, if I'm an average student and I'm on that average pace, it's going to take me, however long, 120 credits for an online degree. So, for 4 years or so to the finish line, if my math isn't completely off. So that's the utility of this, is a way of avoiding falsely imposing some sort of cohort on online students when in fact they're starting at very different points.
Yeah, but I would argue that works against this measure entirely, because we don't ever promote to students average information, because everything is tailored individually to the individual student, because they're all bringing in unique circumstance. And so that's the importance of our advising and our coaching work, is to make sure that if they understand that they've got 64 credits they're bringing in, then they could graduate at a much quicker pace if it was doable for them and if that was the arrangement. However, if they happen to be one of our students who's working for Starbucks or one of our other corporate partners that we're working with, they just simply may not have the capacity to do more than 1 or 2 courses a semester. And that then we will map out a program for them over that length of time. And then we can coach them to make sure that they stay on pace and advance. So I think I'm not sure that it's, as a public facing measure, it's really going to help students, because what all of us need to do is work with our students based on what they present to us to help them then develop a program to help them graduate in a timely way.
But I do think that this gives it gives the board a vision of the speed with which the average online student is going through the remainder, can go through the remainder of their degree process. And so I think it does give the board something. It's not an individual student measure in any way, shape, or form, but I think it does give the board some sense of the pace towards progress in a year.
I wouldn't argue against that point. My concern was Helen's point that we were going to use this as a public-facing indicator for students to project how long they would take to graduate, and that's my concern. So I don't have a problem sharing the information with the board and the board, asking us about it or whatever. But I do think that it's very important not to conflate that assessment that the board may want to make with a student then using this data for something as a predictive tool about their future.
Okay. Yep, I don't see this as supplanting the advising process at any of the institutions at all. So I think it just gives the board a sense of speed through the system.
Okay.
Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, I think we're on to 4.
So metric 4 is courses taught by faculty with a doctorate or other terminal degree. So the percentage of online courses that are taught by faculty with these credentials within the field of instruction. We think this is a necessary safeguard to ensure that students are being taught both by individuals with the requisite academic training and expertise in the field of instruction. We think there's broad consensus around this one, but I would invite any comment on this particular metric. Okay, well, it looks like that one is okay. So metric 5, I understand there is a little more contention, and I'm not sure that we've necessarily quite hit the mark on this one. Metric 5 is courses taught by faculty who are tenured or tenure track. So again, a percentage of the online courses taught by instructional faculty who are tenured or tenure track. Our rationale for including this is an attempt to ensure or encourage that there is oversight and some sort of sense of custodianship over the online education by universities' core personnel. And I understand that there have been various comments about this particular metric from, I think, both U of A and ASU. So I'd invite both provosts to add their comments on this one. Like I said, I'm not sure this is precisely where it needs to be, but I think there is some broad consensus around the concept, the general concept of having core university personnel having some oversight over online curriculum and teaching.
I think that it is important that our faculty be fully engaged in this teaching, and we have made that a priority for the institution. And to that end, we believe it should be all of our full-time faculty, not just our tenure track, because the non-tenure track faculty are essential to the institution, and we don't treat them as if they're somehow differently in that sense. They participate through their work in curricular development. I mean, we could not have a nursing program online or in any fashion without our clinical faculty. And this would suggest that those clinical faculty are not important to the teaching of our online program. And that just simply would not be an accurate thing. The same thing would be true in social work. There's a variety of programs where our non-tenure track faculty are essential parts of that teaching. But I do think it should be full-time faculty because I do think that they need to be part of the conversations around curriculum design. They need to be part of the conversations about how courses are developed and what we expect and the learning outcomes and the competencies we expect from students. And so that there's a broad general conversation about that they are party to. And I think it speaks to the commitment that we try and make to our students to ensure that they're not getting a differentiated student or experience from what our on-campus students get.
Thank you. I see Provost Folks and then Provost Stearns as well have their hands up.
I can be very efficient. I only want to agree with everything Mark just said.
That was easy.
And I would second that. I wanted to state that at NAU, the difference between tenure and non-tenure is that there's an expectation of research and creative scholarship that goes into the tenure process. But for our online programs, as they've already said, there's a benefit of our clinical faculty and our faculty of practice that bring the real world occupational experience that we need to train students for. So also for us, the distinction of tenure track is not the most important for the quality of the instruction.
So for those of us who are not from academe, how does one define a full-time faculty?
Well, these are the, we could either use the benefits eligible threshold, which would be 51% or whatever it is, or more employed by the university, and that this is their principal employment is with the university.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions from the committee on those?
Yeah. Chair Manson, I had my hand up.
Yes. Regent Taylor.
Yeah, I just, thank you. And for Helen, these particular metrics for the quality, did you draw from other online program metrics at other institutions?
Yes, certainly, Regent Manson. Jane Kuhn, who has recently joined our office, did a fairly thorough sort of scan of existing metrics for other online providers. And we also looked fairly closely at the components that are used to make up the US News and World online program rankings. So a lot of these are very similar to metrics that have been devised for other institutions with large online offerings as well. And certainly focus on faculty with terminal degrees, and also a focus on full-time or tenure track faculty is quite common across the industry. We will be happy, given there seems to be consensus across the three provosts, to adjust this to full-time / benefits eligible employees if that is the preference of the universities.
Thank you.
I think we move forward in that way then.
So that brings us to our final metric, which is US News and World Report ranking for online bachelor's degree programs. This is a index that all three of our institutions already report to. So we are not anticipating any additional impost on the IR offices or any of our three universities in continuing to participate in this. We are well aware that there are mixed opinions on the utility of US News and World. What we would say in favor of using this here is that unlike US News and World rankings for immersion programs, there is no criteria that reflects the selectivity of admissions, which I know is something that often is a cause for consternation with our institutions in that domain. We think this is a useful approximation of the national reputation of our online programs. It's also a useful aggregation, as Provost Searle has already alluded to, of a bunch of things that are considered important in terms of online progress and student success. So we would vouch for having this included here.
Okay, any concerns or comments regarding that?
I think the ranking is okay. I think, as Helen said, they all come with shortcomings, and so you're just choosing from among those with different assets and liabilities. I think where we find it odd, and just so that the board is aware when going forward with this, is that you get programs like some of our competitors who have very, very tiny programs, maybe 1,000 or less students in their program, and they get highly ranked. Well, we could do a lot more if we were only teaching 800 students. So I just think it's important to keep the context in mind of what we're looking at. But we're okay with it as a measure.
Yeah, I think we run into those types of things every time we do a ranking measure. So they're the coin of the realm, and it is what it is, and we just need to be cognizant of the pieces. Well, Helen, I appreciate. Are there any further comments or questions from university staff or committee? Okay, seeing, oh, I see Fred. Yep.
Great, thank you. And Helen knows what's coming because we've talked about this. So I want to raise sort of the really, 30,000 foot strategic question about this process. So we got here because of our experience with the traditional metrics, which, promulgated 10 years ago and then didn't morph into differentiated institutional metrics as quickly as it was intended. And there has been a growing feeling that we unintentionally incentivized the universities to become more similar than differentiated. We can argue whether that's accurate or not, but certainly some concern around that. My question around this process at this stage for the online metric is whether that there are a variety of different things that we might want to achieve in online. It might be credits, it might be completion, it might be revenue. There's a number of objectives. There's a number of ways to get a sustainable platform. And what we've done, and I just want to be sure we're intentional about it, is that we've defaulted to quality and completion as the driving imperative. Now that may be the right thing, but it's sort of been an operational assumption. And as Helen correctly says, our students to date are students who are seeking completion. But I wonder and that's a good thing, but I wonder in that process whether what we've done is that we are incenting all three universities to chase a capped consumer market of those who are seeking a complete outcome from the online experience. If that's intentional, great, but just want to pose the notion that around pricing, around different moving parts, that we may be precluding a low-cost option for one of our institutions. That may be intentional, but we want to pose that. And we are, rather than expanding the customer base, we are offering three products to chase the customer base of those who are seeking completion. There may be a viable path for three institutions in that regard, but frankly, I worry that they not become too similar and that we not cap the audience, and instead that we also make sure that we are differentiating our products sufficiently to chase new markets that each can find a viable population that is economically sustainable.
I think those are really good points. So yeah, this is the first time we've really had any discussions about how do we measure online. And it seems like the discussion that we've had has been very broadly about online in general and not particularly about our programs individually, but about how do we measure online broadly. And perhaps the next discussions moving forward with the working group are we looking at should we be looking at each of the schools individually and measuring something slightly different based on where those online programs, are, geared to go and targeting from each institution. I think that's a really valid place for the conversation to go next.
Regent Manson, if I can add something.
Sure.
We sort of looked at this as well, particularly item 6 with the U.S. Consumer Report, and as Provost Searle mentioned, it may not be perfect, but people do use it, that sort of thing. But we also wanted to do a little bit more exploration in terms of student satisfaction, what students really think about our online programs and what their experiences are like. So we're sort of pilot testing a process where, think about it. Online students are just like they're online consumers. They look everywhere, they do their research before they decide which university is the best fit, which culture do they feel more at home at. And what we endeavored to do was try to find a way that we could really gauge students, in a review fashion. So like when you're going on Amazon, you're going to buy something. you check your reviews first before you actually hit the purchase button. As in many things that we do, that's just normal consumer behavior, particularly online. So what we're trying now is actually implementing in a pilot test way, just to see, if this would actually hold suit here, would be students reviewing the actual programs that they're in, and that other students who come and check out that same program can read what other students said about their experiences there. And we're working it through now, with less than maybe 10% of our overall programs, but we're starting to get students' feedback live, and it's anonymous. So the good thing about that is that you get the true reviews of how students feel. So we see it as another way of sort of buttressing the U.S. News report on a more granular level with what students are actually saying as they are enrolled in the program. So it's a dicey move that we're taking here at the University of Arizona, but we think it's worth it, because at the end of the day, if it's really about getting our students to their goals, to complete their degrees, and we want to be able to tweak and make things a little bit more personalized on their path and a little bit more effective at their outcomes, then these are the steps we're willing to take. So that's just something that we're trying out now.
Yep, I appreciate it. I think, unfortunately, I think I'm going to have to cut the conversation on this topic at this point, because I am running tremendously behind. This is the first chance we've had to really have a discussion with the committee about the online metrics. So it will be coming back. The working group will continue to meet, and this will be coming back to the committee multiple times, as we move forward. So great comments. I think some very good ideas for moving forward, and we're going to go from there. All right. So I appreciate everybody's input. I want to make sure that we had time. We are now going to move on to the University of Arizona's review and request for recommendation for board approval for their new Gen Ed program. And I will have Provost Folks take the floor.
Thank you so much, Regent Manson. It's a very great pleasure to bring forward our revised general education program to you for review and approval. You will perhaps remember that we've been working on this since 2018. So there's been a vast amount of effort has gone into thinking about how do we devise a world-class general education program that meets the needs of students in very concrete ways and is built on really 20 years of extraordinary research around what works in general education and what doesn't, and what constitutes great pedagogy. I will point in particular to the fact that our own university has considerable expertise and stature in that space. So we've been working with our own faculty very closely to, as we've developed this new framework. You will also recognize that this has not been without contention on our campus. And even this week, some of our faculty have brought forward some concerns. You, I hope, have had a chance to look at the materials that are in your packet. I want to make sure we've also got time to answer any specific questions, because this is a very complicated subject. This is probably constitutes between 25 to 30% of our operations in any given year, and it's thus mission critical to our success as an institution that we do this very, very well. So I want to just take a few moments to talk about the timeline and the process. We have been had this underway since 2018. It was codified as a priority in our strategic plan in 2019. I arrived at the university in 2019 and picked up the mantle, working with Greg Heilman, our Vice Provost now for undergraduate ed, and Susan Miller-Cochran, who is our Director for the General Education Office. We have, I can assert, meticulously and carefully followed all applicable University of Arizona processes for the review and approval of the new program, which was a question that was raised this week. The program was approved at our April 5th, 2021 Faculty Senate meeting. And far from being symbolic, it does, a vote of the full Faculty Senate, in fact, represents the views of the faculty and triggers the proposal being brought forward today for your review and approval. We have had faculty from every college involved in developing the proposal that you have in front of you and have been working very closely with the key shared governance committees on the specifics to make sure that we were addressing all the concerns that have been brought forward on campus, but importantly, making sure and critically making sure that we were absolutely addressing all of the policy requirements that are before us now with ABOR's updated and revised policy, which you will remember importantly introduces a component of American institutions, or a focus on American institutions, which was not explicitly articulated in the earlier policy. We have now we are working towards a general education program which reduces the total number of credit hours from 36 to 32, and thus does indeed reduce the credit hours in all the traditional disciplinary fields in a very conventional sense. I would point out, though, that this change is a core part of our strategic moves to increase student degree completion rates and, importantly, brings us into much closer alignment with peer institutions. So we're very committed to moving in this direction and believe it's critical to our success on the degree completion side. That said, we are very, very confident that the new program, which replaces an existing gen ed program that's been in place for 20 years, really will be a much more integrated framework that ensures that we have much richer experiences for all of our students across that somewhat reduced number of credit hours. I would point out in particular that the new gen ed program increases students' exposure to scientific reasoning, but does so through interdisciplinary courses that will focus not only on how science helps us understand the natural world, but also contributes to a holistic view of what it really means to be a citizen in the 21st century and beyond. I would also note that the proposed program is evidence-based. It is centered on evidence-based learning and necessitates that our faculty develop active learning pedagogical approaches. This is key, we believe, to continued success. There is acres of literature that demonstrates that the prior single modality approach of sage on the stage, as the common catchphrase, lecturing at students, is demonstrably inferior to multimodal engaged learning practices. And we're very proud of the fact that our university has international standing in the research that demonstrates that this is true. So we absolutely want to leverage our own research practices as we evolve our new gen ed process. I want to make very clear that the new gen ed program is structurally less complex than our current gen ed program, and one of our core objectives is to make it easier for students to navigate the gen ed requirements. I want to make it really clear that we're working extremely closely with our own Transfer Credit and Articulation Office, but importantly also with AZ Transfer to ensure that we have improved processes for students to transfer to the University of Arizona from other institutions and from our community colleges. And I'll add a sidebar that we're in active conversation with the Provost at Pima Community College, which is one of our largest sources of transfer students, because they are interested in adopting our general education program to ensure that we have 100% alignment between our two institutions, which I'm delighted that we're in that conversation and that they're such good partners with us. But we are also very committed to the AZ transfer process and have been very engaged in building digital tools to help students navigate into our four-year universities through that statewide program. We have had to delay deployment of the program because of the pandemic. We were originally planning for a fall 21 deployment. We are now looking at spring 22 for a fairly soft launch, and fall 22 will be our sort of full-scale implementation. That was necessary because of the pandemic. We just had a lot of stress and stressors on our faculty and staff this year, and this felt like something that we could reasonably push off for a year. And then there are budget implications for our colleges as this new Gen Ed program is introduced, and we are working actively with the academic colleges to model out and ensure that all and any budgetary impacts that arise are clearly communicated in a timely manner and capably managed. But that is something that's still evolving, I would say. And then finally, I want to make absolutely clear that we are 100% committed to meeting all aspects of the updated ABOR policy, including the new knowledge area that addresses American institutions. In fact, I can personally commit that I am knee-deep in literature around best practices and pedagogy in this space myself. So we are, as a team, deeply, deeply committed to this piece of the new policy. We have obviously consulted with our key faculty who have expertise in the various subtopics under this knowledge area. And from those conversations, we've developed a multi-pronged approach to the deployment of the American institutions component. That approach has been shared to the key shared governance committees here on campus, our university-wide General Education Committee and the Undergrad Council for review and discussion. We are continuously revising and improving this as we move through our review stages. But I want to outline that the approach that we're taking is that we plan to assess our incoming students' knowledge about American institutions, because this is a new area for us under Gen Ed. We are then going to direct students into the courses that will build from their foundational knowledge and improve their mastery across the breadth of the knowledge area under the American Institutions banner. And then we're going to conduct outgoing assessments in alignment with our two sister institutions here to determine whether our approaches are effective in advancing students' mastery from the day they come to the university to the day they exit. We're very committed to assessment because we don't know a lot about our incoming students' foundational knowledges, and we will absolutely be adjusting as we go and as we start to see data emerge on how students enter the institution and what we can achieve in terms of improving mastery through the Gen Ed curriculum. We are currently doing the work of identifying where we have existing courses that emphasize American institution topics because we want to prioritize those for the course revision process so that they can be approved and ready to go for the spring 22 rollout. And then we're performing a gap analysis to understand what new courses will be needed to ensure that we are fully addressing all of the policy requirements. I would note that there is a sort of a matrix or a crosswalk document that we've been using to make sure that our Gen Ed curriculum addresses all areas of the ABOR policy equally, and also that our own learning outcomes that we've framed up. Finally, I just want to make very clear that the communications processes around this have been deep and broad. We have had in the past 12 months, we've had more than 100 meetings with stakeholder groups. We have met with every single college community separately. We have minutes from discussions in all the shared governance settings. So I do reject the concept that in any way we have not been open to people participating in the process. Hundreds and hundreds of faculty have been actively involved in bringing the curriculum structure, the framework for our Gen Ed program together. And we're very proud of the work that's been done and looking forward to launch that as soon as spring 2022. And I'd be very happy to answer any questions.
So do I have questions or comments from the committee? Regent Rusk?
Thank you, Chair Manson. Provost Folks, I just have one question. So with the budgetary models, as you sort of already mentioned, what are you doing to incentivize creating enough classes from each of the colleges while also making sure that we're not loading back into that, rolling snowball up to 500 gen eds and every class being labeled with drugs, sex, or rock and roll?
I gather those can be attractors. So Regent Rusk, I would say that we've had a relatively hands-off approach to matching supply and demand in our current Gen Ed curriculum. And so what we are moving towards is much more of an active management approach where the Office of Gen Ed will be modeling out which courses are needed in what quantity, how many seats in each semester, looking out 2 years ahead and working directly with the colleges to make sure that those seats are available for students when they need them. So that's not work that we have had going on. We've been much more, in fact, what we've been doing basically is oversupplying seats, right? Rather than making sure that we had at least operationally efficient fill rates in our general education classes. So, ideally we will end up with a tighter set of offerings where students are in much more structured pathways. We know that leads to better student outcomes. We know that allowing students to I refer to it as wandering around in the woods, when students are just picking randomly from long lists of available courses that might meet a Gen Ed requirement, but there's no articulated structure or framework. That tends to cause students to lose focus on the end goal and what the larger objectives are for the program, for the general education program. So we are very, very, very mindful that to ensure degree completion, retention and completion goals are met, that we have to have seats available exactly when students need them, and we will be actively managing towards that end. I will also put an asterisk next to that, which is that I'm very committed to making sure that the budget model is structured so that general education is at least as high a priority as delivering curriculum in the majors.
Thank you.
Regent Taylor-Robson.
Thank you, Chair Manson, and thank you, Provost. I really first want to thank you for all of the work and the 100 meetings that you've had, and you're taking seriously the notion that we must develop the skills, the qualities of mind.
Uh-oh. We've just lost you.
I'd like to understand a little bit more, and I may be asking you to speculate, but the letter that we all received from the group of faculty members late yesterday and what their concerns, I mean, they've articulated their concerns, both procedural and substantive, but how did we get to a place where we've had so many meetings and yet we've got a group that either didn't participate or wasn't allowed to participate? I'm trying to understand the impetus for their letter, if you can help me out.
I'm happy to. As you say, I am speculating. I will only say that we can host meetings, but we cannot make people attend. And as always, it has been a coalition of the enthusiastic and the willing that have come together and brought their passion for general education to the table. And the authors are not among those who have regularly engaged in or participated in the development of the framework. They have, however, been emailed regularly about the meetings available to them learn more.
Okay, then so that's really my procedural question, but substantively they call out the civics education requirement, and it leads me to a question that I had before their letter, and that is in the new curriculum of 32 units, you've called out entry courses, foundation courses, or in perspective and building connections. And in the foundation courses, we have math, writing, and second language proficiency. Did you look at the possibility of having a foundations course in civic knowledge, in particular for those students that are coming into the university without that?
We are actually taking a very similar approach to how we think about writing and how we think about mathematics for incoming students, in that with the plan to undertake an assessment of incoming students to understand their civics knowledge understanding coming in, so that we can map them into the appropriate level of curriculum within the general education program. So in fact, we are aligning the approach for American institutions to the approach we currently take for mathematics and for, let's say, composition. I would like to share one slide, if I might be permitted, which might help with this question. Regent Taylor Robson, just if I can do this and share my slide. See if I can do this competently. Share screen. And that one, and if I can get it to go to full screen so that you can see it clearly. Is that evident now?
Yes.
Terrific, thank you. So when we look at the ABOR knowledge areas, which are listed on the left, you'll see American institutions as the last one shown. What you see here then is that it maps horizontally across into the general education foundations and core courses. It will pick up a blend of different general education attributes, and that was sort of too long to add on to this table. Interestingly, it's the only one of the knowledge areas where we plan to have two separate assessments, which is just a recognition of the fact that this is relatively new to us. And so we want to do an incoming student assessment and an outgoing assessment, or a completion assessment, a learning outcomes assessment, which was sort of traditional. I hope that clarifies how that integrates in exactly aligned ways.
Yeah, I think Regent Taylor Robeson lost her connection, but I know, right in the answer to her question. I think the clarity piece here is that you are, much like you do with writing composition, you are testing people coming in, seeing where they have capacity, where they lack. And then, if I understand it, you're going to make a recommendation for the courses they take to cover the American institution, Western economic thought requirements. Exactly. To get them to a passing level in the exit test.
Right.
My only question was the words give them recommended courses. Do we need to be more structured than recommending? Because you can give a kid a recommendation and they can turn and walk the other way. So my concern is that we actually are giving them, these are, of the civics courses that are eligible, these are the 3 that you should choose from. And those are the only things, to meet gen ed that's going to fit in, that's going to be accepted in your schedule.
Yes, I'm struggling with exactly that language too. So none of the there will be a requirement, and they must select from some selection of courses in order to meet the requirement. What we want to do, though, is use their individual assessment outcomes to encourage them towards the courses that will build from their current basis of knowledge and mastery coming in. So there's no escape clause. They have to take at least the minimum level of the floor of the curriculum, but we also recognize that a student who's coming in with AP history will probably want to take more advanced curriculum than a student who didn't do AP history.
Unless they're looking for an easy A and they're going to take whatever the base level civics course is.
That isn't the usual experience of our Wildcat students. They're eager and ambitious to push hard, typically. The equivalent would be saying, I don't know, calculus at school, and now I want to do calculus again. And if they don't tell us about the calculus grades, we can, but it's not a common experience for Wildcat students to head in that direction. They're typically eager to learn and explore and build from. And there's a bit of a game we play, of course, about how we message those options to them that encourages them to want to push themselves academically and intellectually. So I think that's it, that the problem you describe is true across all aspects of those areas. And but I think it's a rare student who doesn't want to take the more advanced, more exciting, more far-reaching curriculum. I think that's not that common.
Okay. Regent Penley?
Thank you very much, Regent Manson. Provost folks, I just want to laud you for the progress that you and the faculty have made at the university. It's really quite extraordinary. And it really addresses that very central problem that Regent Rusk raised earlier, and the plethora of tracks that you can take to complete your gen ed at many universities across the country. So praise to you and the faculty. What are your next steps for faculty governance and working through the collaboration that's so necessary to make this effectuated in the longer run?
Oh, terrific question. So we're knee deep right now, because over the summer we're running workshops with the faculty who are eager to come into the new general education program to help them understand what the requirements are to have their individual courses accepted into the new general education program. So many faculty have, taught the same gen ed course for many years, and we're asking a lot of them in terms of taking a fresh look at their curriculum, structuring it perhaps with more modern pedagogical approaches, and also making sure that the assessment tools that they use in their course map to the assessment outcomes and will provide the data we need to understand how effectively the gen ed program is working comprehensively. We have had many faculty already engaging in this work, and there'll be many more over the weeks ahead, working out how they will go through the process of revamping either existing curriculum or, in some cases, new curriculum already. Mostly, though, we're looking to work on existing curriculum now to the extent that we can, and we'll spend the fall semester working on new curriculum ideas that the faculty will bring forward under this new framework and umbrella structure. In terms of faculty governance, excuse me, coughing, we have actually set up a process, actually since the last Faculty Senate meeting, set up a process where we have elected faculty senators who are participating directly in the work of making sure that the policy and processes that are still coming together are so that we're in fluid conversation with the Faculty Senate more broadly. They have agreed to come and work with the committees directly, which is terrific. We're very excited about that. And those meetings are happening all through the summer and of course into the fall semester as we get ready. We're also in the process, early stages of building out the digital tools that we need to provide to students so that they can explore the gen ed curriculum on their own and lay out their own plans and thinking about, to meet my gen ed requirement, I would like to head down this path. I would like to explore these pieces of the curriculum. We want a digital tool for them to be able to do that exploration on their own, to save their proposed or planned pathways, and so that and have it available to their advisors to look at. So late, 6 months later, when they go in and talk to an advisor, the advisor can look at the tool, the digital tool, and say, well, here's where you were 6 months ago. This is what you were thinking. Can I suggest we change this for that? Can I suggest that we move this to a different semester so that you can do different pieces of your major? Those sorts of discussions will be able to happen in much better informed ways than students going in and trying to verbally articulate in the meeting with the advisor what their thinking is. So we're trying to give the students a lot more control over exploring the gen ed curriculum on their own, but also have it be that sort of thought process be readily available to their advisors. So that tool is just being developed now.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one other very quick question on this, and then I think we're going to have to move on, but this was really, really exceptionally well done. I would ask that when it talks about the communication goals, there is nothing in there about oral communication. There is nothing in there about verbal communication. It all sounds like it's based on written. And I truly believe that while somebody can be civil while they're writing, it takes another talent, another skill set to be civil while they are speaking. And so I would appreciate it if that would be considered.
Point well made, and I concur completely, and it's an oversight if we've missed it out. It's certainly been part of our dialogue, but it may not have made it into the narrative.
And I may have missed it, but if it could be, if it is there, let me know. If it's not, if it could be added, I would greatly appreciate that, because I think that is extraordinarily important.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? We do need to kind of keep moving. I am going to get fail grade today for sticking on time. I am going to make a motion that the committee forward to the full board for approval the where am I? I'm sorry. The University of Arizona's General Education Program. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion does carry. Thank you. We are going to stay with University of Arizona, and we're going to talk about a request for a new organizational unit and some new academic programs. So Liesl, you are back on the floor.
We are indeed, and now I've got to pull up the right document. Just a minute.
I don't feel so bad.
Oh, now I've got all flapped about. Not having the right document open. Just one moment. Here we go. All right, new programs. Oh no, I've still got the wrong document. Just a minute. Here we go. Just a minute. I just want to make sure I've got the right words in the right order. All right, agenda item 8 is our new School of Mining and Mineral Resources. I'm super excited about this. This is a joint effort between our College of Engineering and our College of Science. I don't know how much you know about mining schools, but they tend to be a little oldie worldy, a little long in the tooth, little backward looking. We are very excited to have developed a framework for this new entity, which will be very much around shaping mining for the 21st century. So very centered on digital tools, knowledge-based development, and sustainability for Arizona's economy. There's a global increase in demand for minerals, and extraction is becoming harder and harder as we work towards more obscure sources of minerals. And the US in particular is in need of sort of workforce modernization to guide the industry forward. We are uniquely positioned to develop the state and national workforce, and we're excited to bring existing resources together into this new effort, which we plan to grow and build out, with the ultimate goal of becoming the world's premier program in this space. We already have really strong industry and alumni support. We've already secured a good amount of private funding to move this forward, and we're seeking the board's approval for this new unit.
All I can say is I was surprised you guys didn't have one already.
There we go. There we go.
Any other comments or questions from the board? Okay.
Very good. The next item is we've got a Master of Arts proposed in Program Design and Evaluation from our College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. This is a fully online program, and the goal is to equip our students with the knowledge and skills to design and implement community-focused and research-based solutions to problems in social systems, and then evaluate the impact and effectiveness of those solutions. The program is designed specifically to meet the needs of currently employed professionals and students with 7.5-week cycles leading to a completed degree in just 12 months. Students will do a lot of experiential learning. They will immerse themselves in the process of identifying and understanding key research problems of our time, with the focus on creating viable and sustainable solutions and examining clearly and articulating the evidence of the impact of those programs. The program is importantly designed to provide students with transferable skills that would be applicable across different industry sectors and populations, and easily able to be migrated from sort of one set of challenges and problems and communities to another. So it'll be very broad in its approach to these problems of designing programs and evaluating them for performance outcomes.
Do we have any questions? Moving forward.
The last one, also very exciting, is a master's degree in data science, also proposed by our College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. This is a highly in-demand field, which requires technical skills to organize information, to analyze large data sets, and to communicate results clearly, to answer core questions and drive strategy in all sorts of organizations across all sectors. The program makes novel use of stacked certificates and will engage programs across the university to provide students with opportunities to develop skills and knowledge that are appropriate to their specific interests and domains of study. So I'll give you an example. Students might be interested, for example, in data visualization. We won't just have one set of courses that deals with data visualization, but instead might have 2 or 3 different stacked sets of courses that could lead to a certificate in data visualization for health sciences versus data visualization for, pick a different discipline, for journalism purposes, for example. So providing students with multiple stackable certificates will allow them to tailor the degree to meet their exact needs. Excuse me. Students can enroll directly into the MS degree from the beginning, or they might enroll in the foundational certificate as a way to onboard working adults who may be anxious about their ability to complete a whole master's degree.
Excellent. Any additional comments, questions? I think we have agreement on those. So is that
that's it from me.
That's it? Okay, then I am going to make a motion that the committee forward to the full board for approval the request for a new academic organizational unit and new academic programs for the University of Arizona. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to move to a credit exception request for Northern Arizona University. Provost Stearns.
Thank you, Chair Manson. And first of all, thank you all for your kind words. I very much enjoyed my time with the board. Special thanks to Chad and Helen and the rest of the board staff who have been so helpful. NAU has one item for your consideration today, and that is an exception to the community college transfer credit limit of 64. We're asking to allow 75 for our Bachelors of Science in Biological Science. And the motivation for this is, of course, to increase matriculation at the community colleges, increase transfers into NAU, into one of our popular degrees, and so to ease the path of completion for a BS degree. And we're asking for the 75 credits exception to allow students to complete the general studies and the 100 and 200 level courses at community college and then transfer into NAU for the upper division classes. And that's really it in a nutshell. So I'm happy to take questions or offer more detail.
Are there any questions? I unfortunately have one briefly. So as we are sitting, discussing today, revamping our Gen Ed program, this seems to be a request to allow and I know we already allow them to complete all their gen ed requirements at the community college. So I guess I don't really understand what the additional 11 credits are for. Is that the additional 100 and 200 sciences plus a lab? Is that?
Yes, ma'am. So 100 and 200 level courses towards the biology degree at the community college that would, so the science and math, and then leaving them to come to NAU for the upper division classes.
Regent Penley?
I just want to laud Provost Stearns, you and the NAU faculty and staff. We've really focused on collaboration with the community colleges, and very much NAU has led the way on that in so very many ways. This is another fine example. Thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much. All right, are there any additional comments or questions? Then I am going to move the committee forward to the full board for approval, the credit exception for Northern Arizona University. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Provost Stearns. Our last item today is the approval of the list of qualifying exams for high school and high school teacher incentive bonuses. And Mark Denke from the board is going to present.
Well, thank you, Chair Manson. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Each year, the board is required to approve an updated list of qualifying examinations for the purpose of awarding schools and teachers additional funding from the state. There are 5 exams that are new to the list, 2 Cambridge International exams in geography and 3 IB exams in math. The complete list can be found on the last page of your committee materials. The list was reviewed by each of the universities and the board staff to ensure that there was course equivalency alignment across the different exams. There is a legislative requirement that the approved list is sent to the JLBC and ADE prior to September 1st. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from the board? Seeing none, I move that the committee forward to the full board for approval the list of qualifying examinations for high school and high school teacher incentive bonuses. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We are now adjourning the Academic Affairs Committee, and I believe we come back at 1 o'clock for finance in executive session. Is that correct?
So before we go away, we need to call finance to order.
Okay.